In the shadows of Peru's mountains, where the thin air makes every step feel twice as heavy, colossal stone blocks still stand, stacked with a precision that defies time. They are often credited to the Inca, yet the closer we look, the more the explanations of conventional history seem to dissolve. Stone slabs weighing dozens of tons are fitted so tightly that not even a sheet of paper can slide between them. Earthen pyramids rose here long before Egypt built its wonders. Elongated skulls have been unearthed, shaped in ways unlike any normal human anatomy. Together, these traces form a picture at once breathtaking and unsettling. Could it be that a prehistoric civilization once reached a level of technology far beyond its age, only to vanish without a sound? Or are these the remnants of visitors from elsewhere, transformed into gods by myth and memory, their presence slowly buried beneath the dust of time? We will follow these clues, crossing the boundary between archaeology and legend, where questions multiply faster than answers. Welcome to Deformed History. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now. I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. High in the sacred valley of Peru, the air grows thin, the mountains rise like walls, and silence spreads across the ridges as though the land itself has been holding a secret for millennia. Here, on the slopes above a modest modern town, stand the ruins of Ollantaytambo. To an ordinary traveler, it might look like a fortress with terraces carved into the hillsides, yet the closer you move toward its heart, the stranger the story becomes. Massive blocks of pink granite lie fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot slip between their seams. Some of these stones weigh between 50 and 70 tons, each one towering like a silent witness to a forgotten age. Conventional history tells us Ollantaytambo was built in the 15th century by Pachacuti, one of the most renowned emperors of the Inca. His reign is remembered as a period of expansion, ingenuity, and power. And yet, when the eye follows the polished faces of these colossal rocks, when fingers trace the smoothness and the sharp angles, doubt inevitably begins to creep in. Could the Inca, with their hammerstones and bronze chisels, have truly shaped and transported these giants across miles of rugged terrain? Could they have hauled such burdens from a quarry on the other side of a river, and then up steep mountain slopes with nothing more than ropes and manpower? The orthodox explanation leans on persistence and organization. The idea that thousands of laborers dragged stones along prepared paths, inch by inch, until they reached the site. But standing in front of the wall of 6 massive monoliths, stacked like a puzzle of titans, one cannot escape the sense that this vision feels inadequate. If even today we would require cranes, hydraulic jacks, and steel reinforcements to maneuver such masses, how could a civilization without wheels, without iron tools, and without draft animals have performed such feats? The mystery deepens when you notice the contrast within the very walls themselves. Look at the upper sections, where smaller stones sit mortared with clay, irregular, rough, and almost fragile compared to the giants below. These are Inca additions, layers built atop the foundation. But the foundation itself tells another story, one the Inca could not replicate. They may have inherited Ollantaytambo, restored it, expanded it, even revered it, but the essence of the megalithic core does not belong to them. Approaching the Temple of the Sun, where the largest blocks rest, you see more than engineering. You see intention. One block bears an engraving of a stepped cross, the ancient Andean chakana, symbol of connection between the upper world of gods, the middle world of humans, and the underworld of spirits. It is as if the very stone itself was meant to be both structure and message, both wall and scripture. Imagine the builders shaping not just a temple, but a cosmic diagram in solid rock. And then the question returns. Who were those builders? If they were Inca, why is the craftsmanship here so far beyond the other works they left us? If they were not, then who came before? Archaeologists have debated this puzzle for more than a century, yet the stones remain unmoved, offering no answers, only silence. Some researchers propose that Ollantaytambo is a palimpsest, a site layered by different cultures across different epochs, each leaving its imprint. The Inca may have found ruins that already defied comprehension, adopted them, and woven them into their own sacred landscape. In doing so, they turned the unknowable past into part of their own imperial identity. But the silence of the stones resists closure. When the light of dawn strikes the granite faces, their red hue glows like embers, and it is hard not to think of fire, of heat, of a technique lost to time. Something that might have softened the stone, made it malleable. There are indentations on some blocks that look less like the marks of chisels and more like the result of melting or pressing, as though the rock itself had once been pliable. Skeptics dismiss such claims, insisting erosion and natural processes are at play. Yet standing there, running a hand across the strange depressions, imagination rebels against such simple explanations. From above, the site reveals its grand geometry, terraces cascading like a giant staircase, walls interlocking with no mortar, channels for water cutting through stone with exact angles. And scattered across the slopes are enormous fragments, blocks abandoned mid-journey, lying where they fell. Did a catastrophe interrupt the construction? Was it war, earthquake, or something else altogether? Why does it feel like a symphony left unfinished, a project too ambitious for its inheritors to complete? Visitors often describe a sense of dissonance at Ollantaytambo. On one hand, there is the clear hand of the Inca, brilliant engineers who mastered terracing and irrigation, who could organize entire mountainsides into productive farmland. On the other, there is the unyielding mystery of the megalithic core, a style unmatched elsewhere, as if it belonged to another lineage of builders altogether. The tension between the two is palpable, heritage and inheritance colliding in stone. Theories multiply. Some whisper about a civilization older than recorded history, perhaps erased by catastrophe, leaving only its bones in granite. Others imagine external teachers, strangers from across the sea, or even from the stars, who bestowed knowledge and then vanished. The stones themselves seem to encourage such speculation, for their precision invites awe. When faced with something inexplicable, the human mind seeks extraordinary answers. As twilight falls, shadows stretch across the valley, and the walls seem to breathe with the fading light. The people of Ollantaytambo, long after the fall of the Inca, still speak of the place with reverence, Legends linger of giants who walked the mountains, of gods who shaped the stones with fire, of ancestors who communed with powers beyond. History may record emperors and conquests, but myth records something else. The memory of an origin too vast to explain. Here, at the threshold of our journey, Ollantaytambo stands as both a fortress and a question. It is a riddle written in stone, where two narratives compete, the tidy story of empire and the elusive echo of something older, stranger, and far harder to define. As we walk among these colossal walls, the ground beneath us feels less like soil and more like a page from a book we cannot read, one whose language is carved not in words but in blocks of granite. And in that silence, in that refusal of the stones to yield their truth, we begin to sense the true weight of the mystery. When you stand before the great walls of Ollantaytambo long enough, the mind begins to notice details that, at first, seem like accidents of nature. Smooth faces are interrupted by odd depressions, shallow hollows that appear neither carved with tools nor the result of natural erosion. Some look almost like fingerprints left behind by a giant hand pressing into clay. The more you study them, the harder it is to imagine bronze chisels and hammerstones responsible for such shapes. Instead, the stones carry the unsettling suggestion that they were once softened, malleable, capable of being molded before hardening again into their present form. This idea sounds fantastical. Rock is supposed to be eternal, rigid, and unyielding. Yet the evidence is there, etched into the very surfaces of the megaliths. A growing number of researchers have speculated about a lost technology, a method by which ancient builders could alter the properties of stone. Some propose chemical processes, perhaps using plant-based acids capable of breaking down granite's crystalline structure. Others envision heat so intense it could melt rock without shattering it, something akin to an ancient torch or furnace of impossible design. These remain theories, hovering at the edge of plausibility, but the stones themselves seem to invite such speculation. The concept of stone softening is not unique to Peru. At Stonehenge in England, on the giant ashlars of Egypt's Aswan quarries, and even in certain temples of Japan, similar peculiarities appear. Tool marks that should not be possible with the instruments attributed to their makers. Across continents, blocks of granite, basalt, and diorite, materials harder than iron, are cut with precision that defies conventional explanation. Could it be that scattered civilizations tapped into a technique we no longer understand? One that made the impossible achievable? Skeptics argue that these features can be explained by natural weathering, the erosion of softer minerals, or the chance breaking of crystalline bonds. But such explanations falter when confronted with the regularity of the patterns and the deliberate placement of cuts. Some blocks at Ollantaytambo bear perfect right angles, grooves with edges so sharp they resemble machine work. One particularly striking stone shows a rectangular cavity with flawless 90-degree corners. To achieve such precision today would require diamond-tipped saws or laser-guided equipment. Yet here it is, buried halfway in earth, the handiwork of hands long gone. The keyhole-shaped cuts deepen the mystery, carved recesses that seem intended for metal clamps or fittings. They appear in sites across the world, Peru, Egypt, even Turkey. Always the same distinctive outline, always the same implication, that the builders possessed a method of securing stone with a system more advanced than simple stacking. If these clamps once existed, they have long since vanished, perhaps scavenged, perhaps corroded away. All that remains are the imprints, like scars left by vanished machinery. One block at Ollantaytambo reveals a cut so smooth, so perfectly flat, that it resembles the work of a circular saw. But to cut granite in this way requires a blade harder than the stone itself. No such tools have been found in Inca contexts, nor in the cultures that came before. Instead, all that archaeology recovers are hammer stones, simple and crude. The gap between what is found and what is required yawns wide, and into that gap spill the wildest theories. It is tempting to dismiss the more imaginative proposals, to fold our arms and say that persistence and patience could explain everything. After all, humans are resourceful, and history is filled with feats once thought impossible. Yet when one runs a hand along those impossibly smooth grooves, skepticism weakens. Something about the texture feels deliberate, intentional. It carries the weight of knowledge, even if the specifics of that knowledge are lost. Legends whispered among the Quechua descendants speak of the ancestors' ability to sing to the stones, to make them lighter, easier to move. Some tales describe liquids that could soften rock, turning it briefly to a paste before it hardened again. Folklore is not evidence, but it often preserves echoes of forgotten truths. Perhaps these myths remember not magic, but a technology so alien to its inheritors that only myth could preserve its memory. Modern researchers have experimented with plant resins and acidic extracts, attempting to reproduce the effect. A few claim partial success, noting that certain plants in the Amazon secrete substances that can break down calcium carbonate. But granite, with its interlocking crystals of quartz, feldspar, and mica, is a far more formidable target. The leap from soft limestone to unforgiving granite is immense. And yet, the stones stand, stubborn reminders that someone, somehow, achieved what we cannot. Looking closer, one notices how the massive blocks interlock not only with their neighbors, but also with the terrain itself. Boulders have been carved to fit precisely into uneven bedrock, as though the mountain itself had been sculpted into part of the structure. The precision suggests not trial and error, but mastery. Each block is not just a unit, but a participant in a larger design, each surface telling the story of a mind that knew exactly what it wanted. Some scholars have floated the possibility of lost metal tools, alloys harder than steel, forged and used by an unknown people. If such tools existed, none have survived. Metal corrodes, stone does not, and so we are left only with the silent testimony of the latter. The absence of tools leaves imagination free to wander, to conjure images of machines, of heat rays, of techniques that border on the science fictional. But perhaps the truth lies in some forgotten branch of human ingenuity, something that did not survive the catastrophes of the past. As the sun lowers in the sky, shadows stretch across the granite faces, highlighting the strange depressions and grooves. They glow softly, as if the rock remembers its malleable state, as if the marks were the fingerprints of forgotten artisans. It is in these details, more than the sheer size of the stones, that the true mystery resides. Anyone can marvel at weight and bulk, but to carve, smooth, and polish granite to such perfection, That is the puzzle that gnaws at certainty. At Ollantaytambo, we are left with questions that blur the line between archaeology and legend. Were the builders ordinary people with extraordinary patience, or were they heirs to a science that has since slipped through the cracks of time? Did they discover a way to bend stone as easily as clay? Or are we simply underestimating the ingenuity of human hands? Whatever the answer, the stones refuse to yield it. They keep their secret in silence, a silence that is almost taunting. And so the traveler departs the site carrying not clarity, but unease. The walls remain, inscrutable as ever, their surfaces polished by centuries of wind and touch, their mysteries deepened rather than diminished. Somewhere between myth and geology lies the truth, waiting. But for now we move forward, into the broader Andean landscape, where even stranger wonders await. If you linger at Ollantaytambo long enough, your eyes start to adjust to the language of the stones. What first seems like random irregularities reveal themselves as patterns, motifs repeated across walls, terraces, and scattered fragments. One of the most curious features is the small protruding knobs found on several blocks, rounded bulges that jut from otherwise flat surfaces, like handles carved into granite. They seem almost playful, as if the builders left behind a clue in stone, daring future generations to guess their purpose. At first glance, the knobs might be dismissed as incomplete carvings, remnants of quarrying or transportation. Perhaps, some say, they were used as anchor points for ropes, leverage for moving the blocks into place. But the mystery refuses to settle so easily. The knobs are not limited to Ollantaytambo. They appear in distant sites across Peru, at Sacsayhuaman, at Machu Picchu, even far afield in Egypt and parts of Asia. Always the same rounded protrusions, always the same sense that they belong to a language of architecture we no longer understand. What were they for? Decorative flourishes seem unlikely, for their design is too consistent to be purely aesthetic. If they were functional, the question becomes, functional for what? They could have been used to maneuver blocks during construction, yes. But then why leave them in place once the stones were set? Some knobs are polished smooth, integrated into the finished wall as though meant to remain visible. It is as if the builders wanted us to notice, to remember. Look closer, and the story grows stranger. The blocks do not merely sit side by side. They interlock in elaborate ways, with irregular polygons shaped so precisely that no mortar is needed. Each stone is cut to fit its neighbors in a puzzle-like embrace, as though the wall were not assembled piece by piece, but conceived as a single entity. The seams curve and bend, adapting to each block's unique form. In an earthquake-prone land, this design is not only elegant but practical, distributing stress across multiple contact points and making the structure almost impossible to topple. To walk along such a wall is to walk through a paradox. The construction is both chaotic and ordered, irregular and precise. Every block is different, yet together they create an unbroken face. The eye struggles to decide whether it is looking at accident or intention, but the hands confirm the truth. The stones are too perfect in their imperfection to be anything but deliberate. Legends of the Andes tell of builders who could make the stones dance, who could command them to fit as if alive. Such myths may be dismissed as colorful storytelling, yet when you stand before a wall that has withstood centuries of earthquakes, you begin to understand why myth was the only language that seemed adequate. The Inca themselves, inheritors of these structures, revered the work as sacred. To them, the walls were not merely defenses or temples. They were the bones of the earth, shaped by forces greater than human. The puzzle deepens when you step behind the grand facade. At the rear of some walls, rougher, looser stonework appears, unmistakably Inca in style. Small rocks fitted with clay, functional but crude compared to the front. This duality suggests two different hands at work, one that wielded precision beyond imagining, and another that patched, repaired, or extended with more modest skill. The Inca may have revered these walls, but they could not reproduce them. Their additions are like annotations in the margins of an ancient manuscript, an attempt to preserve a text whose language they could not read. And then there is the suggestion, haunting, provocative, that what we see now is only a fragment of something larger. From the air, the outlines of Ollantaytambo reveal terraces, stairways, and platforms scattered like pieces of a once unified design. Massive blocks lie half-buried, abandoned as though a catastrophe halted the work. Earthquakes, landslides, conquest, whatever the cause, it left behind ruins that whisper of a vision far grander than what remains. Was this once part of a sprawling temple complex, a cosmic observatory, or a fortress designed not for war, but for something more mysterious? A German artist in the 19th century sketched Ollantaytambo as he saw it, capturing details that have since eroded or disappeared. His drawing suggests that even more colossal stones once crowned the structures, long since toppled or carried away. The image raises an unsettling thought. We are not even seeing the site at its full glory, but only its broken shell. If the present walls inspire awe, what would the complete complex have looked like in its prime? In the gaps between stones, no mortar crumbles because there is none. In the joints, no cracks widen despite centuries of seismic tremors. Instead, the walls flex, absorb, and endure. This resilience is not just technical, it is almost philosophical. The builders seemed to understand not only how to shape stone, but how to make it live with the land, to move with the earth instead of resisting it. Such wisdom feels alien in our modern age, where we build rigid structures only to watch them collapse under nature's force. Here, the ancients built with nature, not against it. Walking along the terraces, you may spot niches carved into walls, precise recesses that once held idols or offerings. Imagine them lit with fire, adorned with gold, resonating with chants carried by the mountain winds. The site was not merely functional, it was alive with ritual, layered with meaning. Every knob, every groove, every interlocking seam may have carried significance beyond the practical, embedding cosmology into architecture. To the builders, stone was not dead matter. It was sacred, a vessel for spirit and memory. And so, the walls of Ollantaytambo become more than ruins. They are storytellers, silent yet eloquent. They speak of a knowledge lost, of a people who could bend stone to their will, of a vision that embraced both the earthly and the cosmic. They remind us that history is not a straight line, but a tapestry, where some threads shine brightly while others fade into shadow. Standing there, you cannot help but feel the presence of something immense, a civilization, a technology, a philosophy, that once stood in harmony with the mountains and then disappeared, leaving only these cryptic signatures behind. Perhaps the knobs are not handles but punctuation marks, signposts left by builders to say, "We were here. We knew things you do not." Perhaps the interlocking stones are not merely engineering, but a metaphor, a lesson that strength comes from unity, from fitting the irregular together into a greater whole. Or perhaps these interpretations are nothing more than projections of our own longing to find meaning in mystery. Either way, the stones endure, and in their endurance, they keep the questions alive. As night gathers over the sacred valley, the walls seem to glow faintly in the moonlight. The knobs cast shadows like eyes watching, the seams shimmer like veins of silver. The silence deepens, and with it, the sense that the story of Ollantaytambo is not over. It is a story that stretches across continents and ages, written in granite, waiting for us to learn how to read. As you move deeper into the site, the contrast between the megalithic core and the Inca's additions becomes unavoidable. It is almost as if two different conversations are happening in the same place, one in a language of precision and permanence, the other in a dialect of adaptation and survival. The Inca were master builders in their own right, ingenious in their use of terraces, aqueducts, and storage facilities. But here, their craftsmanship seems almost humble compared to what they inherited. Look behind the grand walls of the Temple of the Sun, and you find a second layer. Rough, irregular stones held together with clay. These sections crumble more easily, weather more quickly, and lack the interlocking perfection of the great blocks. Archaeologists confidently identify this as the work of the Inca. It makes sense. This is the kind of construction they practiced elsewhere, the style repeated across their empire. But what does it mean when such work is attached to the foundations of something far superior? The most logical explanation is that the Inca stumbled upon ruins of an older civilization, adopted them, and integrated them into their sacred geography. To a people who believed the landscape itself was alive with spirits, these colossal stones must have seemed like the bones of the earth exposed, charged with divine energy. Reusing and expanding upon them was not only practical, it was an act of reverence. The Inca did not need to know who had built the foundations. It was enough to sense that the place was sacred, already marked by powers greater than their own. Yet the very act of building atop the ruins exposes the gap in skill. The Inca patched, filled, and added, but they could not replicate. Even their famed masonry, tight-fitting stones at Cusco and Machu Picchu, lacks the sheer mass and flawless polish of Ollantaytambo's monoliths. It is as if the Inca were playing variations on a theme they could not fully hear. They preserved echoes of an older song, but could not sing it in its original key. Walk around the site, and you will find stones left scattered, half-carved blocks abandoned in quarries, massive fragments lying where they fell. Some say this is evidence of a project interrupted by catastrophe, an earthquake, a landslide, perhaps even war. Others argue it shows the limits of the Inca, who could not finish what their predecessors began. Either way, the image is haunting. A symphony unfinished, notes hanging in the air with no resolution. Legends among local people still whisper of giants who once lived in the valley, beings strong enough to lift stones as though they were feathers. In one story, the gods themselves molded the granite with fire and breath, shaping walls in a single night. To modern ears, these tales sound like myth, but they carry within them an acknowledgement of something extraordinary, something the Inca themselves could not claim as their own. Myths often bloom in the spaces where history cannot provide answers. The debate among scholars follows a similar rhythm. Some insist that the Inca did build it all, arguing that with enough labor and ingenuity, even the heaviest stones could be moved. Others point to the mismatch in styles, the crude mortar walls beside seamless joints, and suggest a deeper past. But archaeology is cautious. Without clear evidence of another culture, the mainstream narrative attributes everything to the Inca. Yet the stones remain uncooperative witnesses, hinting at something more without ever confirming it. When you climb the terraces and look down over the valley, the sense of layering becomes even clearer. Agricultural plots built by the Inca sprawl across the slopes, their function obvious and practical. But the massive red monoliths at the top dominate the scene, commanding attention not by utility, but by presence. They do not look like farm tools. They look like monuments. Their size, their placement, their polish, everything about them suggests they were built for something beyond daily survival. They were messages written in granite, meant to endure. Perhaps this is why the Inca built around them. They were not simply inheriting stone, they were inheriting meaning. To take control of Ollantaytambo was to take control of its symbolism, to lay claim to the sacred narrative of the land. By adding their own walls, terraces, and temples, the Inca were, in effect, rewriting the story, folding themselves into a lineage that stretched back to an age they could not remember. But such adoption raises another question. Who came before? If not the Inca, then what people possessed the knowledge to shape and transport blocks of such magnitude? The highlands of Peru are littered with megalithic sites, Sacsayhuaman, Machu Picchu, Puma punku, each with its own riddles. Are they all expressions of one vanished culture, a civilization erased by time and catastrophe, leaving only its bones in stone? Standing in the shadow of the Great Wall, you cannot help but feel the Inca as both heirs and impostors. They preserved the ruins, yes, but they could not replicate them. They built their empire upon borrowed foundations, constructing their narrative upon someone else's silence. To their credit, they did not erase what they could not understand. They honored it. But in honoring it, they also revealed the limits of their own mastery. As the sun dips lower and the light catches the seams of the granite, the contrast becomes stark. The megalithic stones glow with a quiet power, eternal and unyielding. The Inca additions crumble softly in the same light, already yielding to time. Two eras, two philosophies, two technologies pressed together in one place. It is a juxtaposition so dramatic that even the most skeptical observer must pause. And so Ollantaytambo becomes a dialogue across centuries, the voice of an unknown past speaking in granite, answered by the Inca in clay and stone. One speaks of permanence, the other of adaptation. One built as if for eternity, the other for survival. The harmony between them is imperfect, yet together they form the sight we see today, a palimpsest of human ambition layered upon human reverence. Perhaps that is the true lesson. Not that the Inca failed to match their predecessors, but that they understood the wisdom of building upon what already existed. They did not destroy the mysterious foundations. They embraced them. They recognized that meaning endures even when origins are lost. In their humility before the megaliths, we find an echo of our own awe, standing centuries later, still wondering who laid the first stones. Traveling westward from the sacred valley, leaving behind the red granite giants of Ollantaytambo, the landscape changes. The high ridges descend, the air thickens, and soon the traveler finds themselves among coastal plains that stretch towards the Pacific. Here, buried for thousands of years beneath desert dust, lies Caral, an ancient city that once thrived while the world was still discovering the art of civilization. Long before the rise of the Inca, before the glories of Machu Picchu, before the conquests of the Spanish, Caral had already sung its song. And for millennia, that song was forgotten, waiting in silence until the 20th century. Caral is not merely a collection of ruins. It is a vision of urban life from nearly 5,000 years ago, a time when most of the Americas were still scattered villages. Dating back to around 2600 BCE, Caral was contemporary with the ziggurats of Mesopotamia and the step pyramids of Egypt. Yet it rose here on the edge of a desert in the Supa Valley of Peru. For centuries, it lay buried, invisible beneath the sand, until excavations revealed its scale. A city planned with plazas, temples, residential areas, and trade routes. Suddenly, history had to expand its imagination, acknowledging that the Americas had birthed civilization as early as the Old World. At the heart of Caral stands a massive pyramid nearly 90 feet tall, covering an area of 2 hectares, about the size of 4 modern football fields. From a circular plaza sunken deep into the ground, a grand staircase ascends layer upon layer to the summit. There, traces of fire pits suggest rituals where flames once burned day and night, a beacon visible across the valley. Imagine the sight: a temple glowing in the darkness, the crackle of fire mixing with the wind, priests chanting as the city gathered below. It is both humbling and disorienting, for such scenes belong to an age we rarely associate with such sophistication. Caral was no isolated village. Its streets were organized into districts, ceremonial areas, residential clusters, storage zones. Archaeologists estimate a population of about 3,000, with networks that reached beyond the valley into the highlands, the coast, even the Amazon. They traded fish, cotton, gourds, and precious stones. Caral's people may not have had writing as we know it, but they built quipus, knotted cords used to record numbers and perhaps more. Their society was complex, layered, and connected, contradicting the old assumption that cities in the Americas came much later. What purpose did Caral serve? The monumental architecture suggests religion at its core. The central pyramid was not a palace, but a temple. The circular plazas invited gatherings, rituals, and perhaps astronomical observations. When you stand in one of these sunken spaces, you cannot help but feel the acoustics, the way sound amplifies, the way voices would carry in unison. It was not just a physical stage. It was a theater of the sacred, where cosmology met daily life. There is also the suggestion of astronomy. From the summit of the pyramid, on clear days, the horizon unfolds in a line that meets the sea. It is possible that the structure served as an observatory, aligning rituals with the movements of the sun, the moon, the stars. Ancient people often built their temples as maps of the sky, embedding celestial patterns into earthbound stone. Perhaps Caral's fire was both altar and calendar, measuring time through flame and shadow. What is most astonishing is that Caral rose without evidence of war. Unlike later empires, its ruins reveal no fortifications, no weapons, no signs of conquest. It seems to have been a city of trade and ritual, a society bound by faith rather than force. This absence of violence does not make Caral less mysterious. It makes it more so. How did such an organized, complex society thrive without the engines of warfare that so often drive civilizations? Was it luck, geography, or a different philosophy altogether? When we place Caral alongside Mesopotamia and Egypt, a deeper question arises. How did three civilizations, separated by oceans, all choose pyramids as their monumental form? The ziggurats of Sumer, the pyramids of the Nile, and the step pyramids of Caral all emerged within a few centuries of each other. Coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps it points to a universal impulse, a shared archetype, as if humanity across continents was drawing from the same well of ideas. To some, this convergence is evidence of cultural diffusion, contact across oceans long before Columbus. To others, it whispers of something stranger, the possibility of a common inspiration not of this earth. As night falls over the Supe Valley, the ruins take on a haunting beauty. The pyramids appear like sleeping giants, their steps eroded but still proud. The circular plazas, empty now, seem to wait for voices that no longer come. In the silence, you can almost hear echoes, the drumbeats of ceremonies, the chants of priests, the murmur of crowds gathered in awe. Caral is a reminder that history is not a straight line from primitive to advanced. It is a web with forgotten nodes where brilliance flared and then disappeared, leaving us to wonder what knowledge was carried away with it. For centuries, historians overlooked Caral, convinced that South America had no cities this old. Its rediscovery forced a rewriting of textbooks, a reshaping of timelines. It proved that civilization in the Americas was not a belated echo of the Old World, but a simultaneous flowering. Yet, for all that we have learned, the heart of Caral remains a mystery. Who were its priests? What gods did they serve? What knowledge did they carry, and why did it vanish? The ruins answer none of these questions. Instead, they stand as riddles, their staircases leading not only upward but backward in time, to a chapter of human history that defies our assumptions. Caral is older than the Inca, older than the Maya, older than the Nazca lines carved into desert sands. It is the first known voice of the Andes, speaking across 5,000 years in the language of stone and fire. As we leave the site, the desert wind whistles through the empty plazas, and the pyramids cast long shadows against the fading light. Somewhere in that silence lies the truth of Caral. Was it simply a city, remarkable but human? Or was it part of a greater tapestry, threads woven across oceans, tying it to the pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, perhaps even to the same mysterious hand that shaped Ollantaytambo's granite giants? The question lingers, and like the flames that once burned on its summit, it refuses to go out. From the wind-swept plazas of Caral, the imagination cannot help but leap outward, across oceans, across time. For here in the Supe Valley, a pyramid city took form 5,000 years ago, almost simultaneously with ziggurats rising in Mesopotamia and pyramids taking shape along the Nile. 3 regions, separated by thousands of miles of water, yet all reaching instinctively towards the same monumental design. To some scholars, this is coincidence. the inevitable result of human societies discovering that stepped platforms make stable, enduring structures. To others, the convergence is too striking to ignore, as though humanity across continents was listening to the same faint signal and translating it into stone. Consider the commonalities. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats served as stairways to the gods, artificial mountains rising above the flat floodplains. In Egypt, pyramids were tombs and cosmic engines, their sides aligned with the stars, their geometry echoing eternity. In Caral, the pyramids housed temples and ritual fires, binding community through ceremony and possibly astronomical observation. Different cultures, different expressions, yet always the same triangular ascent, the same compulsion to climb skyward, to create a bridge between earth and heaven. Could such a pattern emerge independently in three places? Certainly. Human beings everywhere look up at the same sky, witness the same stars, and long for connection. The pyramid, broad at the base and narrow at the peak, is a shape of stability, a natural form when building tall with stone. And yet the alignment of timing, the recurrence of ritual function, and the shared symbolism stir suspicion. What if there was contact, some forgotten channel of exchange across the seas? The idea of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact has long been dismissed as fringe. Yet evidence keeps surfacing that complicates the picture. Traces of South American plants have been found in ancient Egyptian mummies, suggesting contact or at least trade far earlier than we admit. Seafaring was not beyond the capabilities of early cultures. The Polynesians, for example, navigated the Pacific with precision long before Europeans charted it. Could it be that unknown sailors crossed the Atlantic or Pacific, carrying not only goods but ideas that took shape as temples of stone? The notion is controversial, for it destabilizes the neat boundaries we draw around civilizations. If Caral had connections to Egypt or Mesopotamia, even indirect, it would mean the world of 5,000 years ago was far more connected than we allow. It would mean that the Americas were not an isolated continent waiting for discovery, but a participant in the earliest chapters of global culture. Some find this intoxicating. Others resist it fiercely, unwilling to rewrite history's comfortable map. But there is another possibility, one that sidesteps oceans and focuses instead on the mind. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, images embedded in the human psyche, patterns that arise naturally across cultures because they are part of our shared subconscious. Perhaps the pyramid is such an archetype, a universal symbol of ascent, stability, and order. Across continents, humanity might have dreamed the same dream, guided not by contact, but by the architecture of the mind itself. And yet, even the archetype theory does not erase the eeriness of the details. The fire altars at Caral, burning ceaselessly, recall the eternal flames of Mesopotamian temples. The staircases leading to the heavens mirror the ceremonial ascents in Egypt. The plazas shaped for gathering echo the communal rituals of Sumer. Independent invention? Maybe. Or maybe all of these are reflections of something else, something that whispered to early civilizations from beyond the stars. For those who favor the ancient astronaut hypothesis, the pyramids are not merely cultural convergences, but evidence of a shared instruction. The gods descended, taught humanity how to build, how to align with the heavens, how to create stone as a mirror of the cosmos. Then they vanished, leaving their teachings fossilized in architecture. It is an idea both thrilling and unsettling, for it suggests that what we call civilization may be, in part, inheritance rather than invention. But even without invoking extraterrestrials, the sense of unity persists. Standing atop Caral's pyramid, gazing at the desert horizon, one can imagine the builders watching the same stars that shone above Egypt and Mesopotamia. The constellations do not belong to one people. They are global, eternal. Perhaps humanity's earliest civilizations simply responded in kind, building monuments as anchors to the same sky. The pyramid becomes less a coincidence and more a dialogue, a global conversation in stone, carried out without ships, without trade, but through the shared canvas of the heavens. What then does Caral tell us about humanity's first steps toward complexity? It tells us that people here, like those across the oceans, were not passive wanderers but architects of meaning. They organized labor, coordinated rituals, and transformed landscape into message. Their pyramids are proof that the human impulse to reach upward is as old as civilization itself, and their timing suggests that humanity, as a whole, was undergoing a collective awakening, a shift from village to city, from survival to symbolism, from earthbound to skyward. Night falls over the Soup Valley, and the ruins fade into shadow. But in the mind's eye, they come alive. Fires flicker once more, priests ascend the stairways, and the people of Caral lift their gaze to the heavens, seeing in the stars not only gods but guides. Across the sea, Egyptians did the same, Mesopotamians did the same, and somewhere deep inside us we still do the same. The impulse to build, to climb, to align, it is older than memory, and perhaps eternal. Caral stands as a reminder that we are part of a story bigger than borders and oceans. Whether through contact, archetype, or something more mysterious, civilizations across the world seemed to speak the same architectural language. And here, in the quiet desert of Peru, the ruins still whisper in that tongue, daring us to listen. Southward from Caral, the land grows harsher. The fertile valleys fade into dry expanses, a desert that clings to the edge of the Pacific like an unending canvas of sand. It is here, in this austere landscape, that another civilization rose and fell. The Nazca. They left behind no towering stone pyramids like Caral, no granite giants like Ollantaytambo. Instead, they carved the earth itself, drawing colossal lines and figures across the desert floor, designs so vast they can only be seen from the sky. But their ceremonial center, Kahachi, concealed another mystery beneath its sands. Human skulls, elongated into forms that seemed to belong to another species altogether. Kahachi was the heart of Nazca ritual life around 2,000 years ago, a city of adobe pyramids and ceremonial plazas. Here, the people gathered for festivals, sacrifices, and religious rites. At its height, the city thrived as the spiritual core of the Nazca, a place where earth and cosmos met. And then, abruptly, it was abandoned. By the 5th century CE, Kahachi had fallen silent, its temples buried under layers of sand. When modern archaeologists uncovered it, they found not only artifacts of daily life, but rows of skulls that defied explanation. These skulls were long, stretched upward and backward in a way that looked unnatural, as though human heads had been reshaped into cones. To the untrained eye, they appear alien, unearthly, resembling the stereotypical gray beings of modern imagination. Large craniums tapering into thin faces, with a strangeness that provokes unease. For some, this was proof enough. The Nazca had encountered visitors not of this world and had imitated their appearance, or perhaps they were descendants of such beings. But science offers another explanation, one rooted not in extraterrestrials but in culture. The practice of cranial deformation, binding the skulls of infants to shape them as they grow, is documented across the world. Among the Nazca, it was a sign of identity and perhaps status. By wrapping the heads of children tightly with cloth or placing them between boards, communities reshaped skulls into elongated forms. It was painful, irreversible, and deliberate. The question is, why? In many societies, altered bodies carry symbolic weight. Just as some cultures stretched earlobes or bound feet, the Nazca, and others across the globe, reshaped skulls. To them, it may have signified beauty, nobility, or closeness to the gods. A different skull meant a different status, a visible marker of belonging to an elite or sacred class. Perhaps those who bore elongated skulls were priests, leaders, or chosen intermediaries between humans and the divine. Yet even if cultural, the practice still whispers of something uncanny. Why did so many societies, separated by continents, choose this same form of skull? In Egypt, mummies of Akhenaten and Nefertiti are said to bear elongated heads, fueling speculation about their divine lineage. In Central America, Mayan elites shaped their children's skulls in similar ways, associating the elongated form with higher status. In the Andes, across tribes and valleys, the same practice repeats. The convergence is difficult to ignore. Were they all reaching toward the same ideal? An ideal shaped by memory of beings who looked different from ourselves? Imagine a Nazca mother carefully binding her infant's head, tightening cloth day after day, year after year. She does not do this for beauty alone. She does it because her ancestors taught that to resemble the gods is to draw nearer to them. If the gods had elongated skulls, whether metaphorical or remembered, then the human elite must reflect that shape. The child grows, the skull stretches, and the community sees not deformity, but divinity. Skeptics will say this is simply cultural symbolism, an arbitrary standard like any other. Yet the eerie alignment with myths of sky beings cannot be dismissed so easily. When the Nazca etched lines of animals and geometric figures into the desert, lines visible only from above, were they honoring gods who looked down from the heavens? Were the elongated skulls part of the same world view, a way of embodying the forms of those gods? What unsettles most is how the skulls blur the line between human and other. Holding one in your hand, its bone light yet resilient, you feel both kinship and estrangement. It is human, yes, but it looks different enough to feel like something else. This tension fuels the speculation that refuses to die, that perhaps the Nazca were not only copying gods, but imitating beings they had actually seen. And yet, the archaeological record offers no spaceship, no artifact of otherworldly origin, only bones, cloth, pottery, and lines carved into sand. The interpretation remains open, suspended between science and myth. Was cranial deformation a human invention of status, or a human response to encounters we no longer remember? Kahachi itself provides no answers. Its adobe temples crumble easily, reshaped by every windstorm. The elongated skulls sit in museums, their stories stripped down to sterile labels. But in the desert, under the endless blue sky, the silence feels heavy. This was once a city where people reshaped their very bodies to align with their gods, where lines on the ground stretched toward horizons, perhaps messages to the stars. That impulse, the longing to become more than human, to touch the divine, still vibrates in the empty air. Standing in Kahachi, one can feel the tension between two realities: the rational, in which skull shaping was an aesthetic and social choice, and the speculative, in which it was an attempt to replicate something witnessed, something remembered. Either way, the effect is profound. The skulls force us to confront how far humans are willing to go to embody belief. They remind us that the body itself can become a canvas of worship, a living monument to ideas beyond reason. As the sun sets, the desert cools, and the lines of Nazca glow faintly in the fading light, visible only from above. Perhaps they were meant for gods with elongated heads who looked down from the heavens, their gaze scanning the sand. Or perhaps they were for the people themselves, reminders of their connection to the sky. In either case, the skulls and the lines speak together, telling a story not of aliens or of anthropology alone, but of the eternal human desire to transcend, to reshape ourselves into the image of the unknown. The elongated skulls of the Nazca are not alone. They are part of a much larger pattern, a strange echo that resonates across civilizations separated by oceans and centuries. From the Nile Valley to the plains of Central Asia, from the jungles of Central America to the islands of the Pacific, the same practice reappears, reshaping the human head into forms that defy our idea of normal. It is as though humanity, at some deep and ancient level, shared a memory or a vision of beings who looked different. And across cultures, people chose to imitate them. In Egypt, the royal family of the Amarna period remains the most famous example. Pharaoh Akhenaten, his queen Nefertiti, and their daughters are often depicted with elongated heads, slender faces, and almost alien proportions. Some scholars argue that these depictions were artistic stylization, a symbolic exaggeration of divine features, but others point to physical evidence, the mummified remains suggesting cranial elongation beyond mere art. If true, it means Egypt's most radical ruler, the pharaoh who abandoned the old gods for the worship of Aten, also embraced a bodily form that set him apart, proclaiming himself not just different in faith, but in flesh. In Africa, the Mangbetu people of Central Africa practiced head elongation well into the 20th century. Photographs show children with their heads tightly wrapped, their skulls gradually reshaped into elegant, elongated forms. To the Mangbetu, this was beauty, refinement, a marker of cultural identity. A long skull meant intelligence, nobility, and grace. The practice was not hidden or marginal. It was central, celebrated in portraits, and admired as a sign of belonging to a refined people. Travel across the ocean to the Americas, and the practice appears again. Among the Maya, cranial deformation was reserved for elites who were considered closer to the gods. Infants were bound with boards or cloth, their skulls lengthening as they grew. When a child matured, their head became a living emblem of status, a permanent sign that they belonged to the priestly or ruling class. In North America, certain tribes also bound skulls, creating distinct head shapes that signified clan or rank. It was not universal, but where it appeared, it carried weight. In the highlands of Iran, Ancient Alans practiced cranial deformation as a symbol of warrior nobility. Among nomadic peoples of Central Asia, such as the Huns and early Germanic tribes, elongated skulls became markers of identity. Archaeological graves reveal warriors with stretched craniums, their bones telling of a practice performed in infancy and worn into adulthood. In some cases, entire communities bore the elongated form, as though the collective had chosen to reshape itself into a new kind of humanity. Even in the far reaches of the Pacific, the same impulse appeared. In Tahiti, Samoa, and among certain groups in Hawaii, cranial deformation was performed to distinguish the elite from commoners. Travelers recorded the sight of islanders with elongated skulls, treating the form as a natural expression of status. The Polynesian world, thousands of miles from the Andes or the Nile, had nonetheless arrived at the same idea. Why? Why would cultures with no apparent contact all choose to modify the very shape of the human head in ways that are irreversible and often painful? The simplest answer is social. The head is the seat of identity, the most visible marker of the self. To reshape it is to create a living crown, a permanent signal of belonging and superiority. Just as clothes, tattoos, and ornaments mark difference, so too did the skull, but in a form that could never be removed. And yet the similarities are too consistent, the form too specific. Cultures did not simply flatten skulls or create random shapes. They stretched them upward, backward, into the same elongated silhouette. That silhouette looks uncannily like the figures of gods and beings described in myths across the world. Long-headed deities in Egypt, sky gods in the Andes, beings of strange proportion in Central America. It is tempting to believe these were not coincidences, but convergences, humanity imitating not ideals, but encounters. Skeptics counter that this is projection, that we are reading modern ideas of aliens into ancient practices. They point out that body modification is universal: feet bound in China, lips stretched in Africa, necks lengthened in Burma. Human beings have always reshaped their bodies to reflect culture, belief, or beauty. Why should the skull be any different? The argument holds weight, but it does not dissolve the mystery of why so many cultures chose the same elongated form, why the skull of all parts of the body became the canvas of divinity. Perhaps the truth lies in a mixture of both. Perhaps early societies glimpsed something, whether beings, visions, or archetypes, that impressed them deeply. Perhaps they saw tall figures with elongated heads and great knowledge, and decided that to imitate was to honor, to approach. Or perhaps the form emerged from dreams, from imagination, from a collective desire to embody the divine. Whatever the origin, the result was the same. Across continents, across millennia, humans willingly reshaped themselves to become more than human. Imagine the ceremonies. A child, head bound with cloth, growing under the gaze of parents who whispered of gods and ancestors. The slow transformation, year by year, until the child's skull no longer resembled those of the unbound. When they walked into the plaza as adults, their elongated heads marked them as chosen, set apart, a living bridge between the community and the unseen. For the rest of their lives, they bore the weight of that choice, a permanent reminder that they were expected to embody something greater. To hold such a skull today is to feel the strangeness of that commitment. The bone curves differently, the silhouette bends upward, and suddenly the familiar becomes foreign. It is human, yet not quite. It is as if the ancestors were experimenting with form, testing the boundaries of what it means to be human. And perhaps, in some way, they were, seeking transformation not through machines or medicine, but through the slow molding of the body itself. From the deserts of Nazca to the temples of Egypt, from the steppes of Central Asia to the islands of the Pacific, the elongated skulls create a hidden map, a web of practices linking distant peoples. We may never know whether it was shared memory, independent invention, or the echo of encounters with beings who walked among us. But the mystery endures, carved not in stone this time, but in bone. As dusk falls on the imagined plaza of Kahachi, one can almost see them. Figures with long heads, draped in ritual cloth, their silhouettes flickering in the firelight. Were they priests, nobles, or something more? We cannot say. All we know is that, for reasons that transcend borders and time, humanity once chose to reshape itself into forms that still unsettle us today. The skulls, elongated and uncanny, are not merely curiosities in glass cases. They are symbols, each one a decision made generations ago to bend the human body into a new shape. To understand them, we must ask not only how they were made, but why entire cultures embraced such transformation. The most straightforward answer is power. To look different is to stand apart, and to stand apart is to claim authority. In societies where hierarchy was sacred, reshaping the skull was a way of marking the elite with a permanent crown, a status carved into bone itself. Imagine the visual effect. A leader with a long, tapering skull rises above the crowd, their silhouette immediately distinct, their very body declaring, "I am not like you." Such difference reinforces the myth of divine right, of chosen bloodlines. The Maya did this with deliberate care, binding the heads of noble infants until their skulls mirrored the profile of maize, the sacred crop. In the Andes, elongated skulls may have marked priestly families, guardians of ritual and lore. The deformation was not hidden. It was displayed proudly, a badge of belonging to a lineage touched by the gods. But power alone cannot explain the universality of the practice. There is also the possibility that altering the skull altered the mind. Modern science acknowledges that cranial deformation does not increase brain size, but some researchers suggest it could influence perception, orientation, even states of consciousness. Pressure on the developing brain might have created sensations interpreted as visions or heightened awareness. If so, the elongated skull was not just a social marker, but a doorway, a physical key to altered states of being. Consider the shamans of ancient cultures who sought trance through drumming, fasting, or hallucinogenic plants. Perhaps cranial deformation was another path, a lifelong induction into a state that blurred the boundary between ordinary reality and the world of spirits. If elongated skulls indeed shaped consciousness, then those who bore them might have truly felt closer to gods and ancestors. For the community, this would have reinforced the idea that their leaders were not only marked differently, but experienced reality differently. They did not just look divine, they thought divine. And then there is the most provocative interpretation, that elongated skulls were attempts to mimic actual beings once seen and remembered. Myths across continents speak of visitors from the sky, tall figures with strange proportions, beings of light or fire who imparted knowledge. If such beings existed, Their appearance may have seared itself into cultural memory. To bind a child's head was to mold them into the likeness of these visitors, to keep the connection alive. In this reading, the skulls are not arbitrary symbols, but replicas, human attempts to embody the form of the gods themselves. Robert Schoch, a geologist who has studied ancient mysteries, once suggested that cranial deformation could be linked to altered states of awareness and even contact with higher dimensions of thought. Others, less cautious, claim outright that the skulls were modeled after extraterrestrials who once walked the earth. Skeptical archaeologists dismiss such claims, pointing to cultural explanations and practical techniques. Yet the resemblance between elongated skulls and popular depictions of greys, the thin-bodied, large-headed beings of modern UFO lore, is undeniable. It is easy to see why imagination runs wild. Standing in a museum before one of these skulls, the mind drifts. The bone curves upward like a dome, the eye sockets appear slightly larger, the cranium stretches farther back than any ordinary head. For a moment, you forget the explanations of binding and cloth. You see instead a silhouette that does not belong in the human family. It is as if the past is whispering of encounters we no longer remember, of visitors long gone, but not forgotten. Whether social, spiritual, or otherworldly, the meaning of the elongated skulls is profound. They are artifacts of humanity's willingness to reshape itself in pursuit of the sacred. No other body modification so drastically alters identity. Tattoos fade, jewelry can be removed, clothing changes, but the skull is permanent, worn until death and beyond. Buried in graves, the long heads endure, carrying their mystery across centuries. They are the ultimate expression of belief, belief written into the very bones of the self. In this sense, the skulls are also a language, a visual script inscribed on the body. To the people who practiced cranial deformation, the message was clear. These are the chosen, the intermediaries, the ones who carry the memory of the gods. To outsiders, the same skulls appear alien, incomprehensible, a code we cannot fully read. Yet the effect is the same. Awe, unease, reverence. The skulls communicate power across time, even to us who no longer share the culture that created them. And so the debate continues. Were these skulls the result of simple social stratification, or were they an embodied mythology? Did they create altered minds, or did they only signify altered status? Were they imitations of remembered beings, or projections of human imagination? Each answer carries weight, and none can fully erase the uncanny presence of the skulls themselves. They sit in glass cases, mute but eloquent, challenging us to see beyond categories of anthropology or fantasy. As the desert night settles over Kahachi, one can imagine the rituals once held there. Fires burning in circular plazas, drums echoing across the sand, priests with elongated skulls lifting their arms to the stars. To the people gathered, these figures were not merely human. They were thresholds, bridges between earth and sky. Their very bodies embodied the promise of contact, the possibility of transcendence. Whether or not the gods came from above, the people believed, and in belief, they reshaped themselves into living monuments of devotion. Today, as we stare at those same skulls, we inherit the same feeling of strangeness. We may call it mystery, or superstition, or speculation. But beneath the labels lies the same truth. The elongated skulls are reminders of humanity's restless desire to become something more, to alter the body in pursuit of the divine. And whether that pursuit was born of memory, vision, or imagination, it left behind a legacy we cannot ignore. A legacy etched not in stone, but in bone. Beyond skulls and bones, beyond the silence of abandoned plazas, there emerges another figure that ties together the ancient Andes, a god whose image appears across centuries, carved in stone, etched in memory, and whispered in legend. His name is Viracocha, the creator deity, the great staff-bearer, a being who stepped out of myth to shape the world and then vanished into the horizon. He is both presence and absence, both origin and enigma, and like the elongated skulls, his story refuses to fit neatly into the categories of history. The earliest image of Viracocha may not be in the Inca Empire at all, but in Caral itself, nearly 5 millennia ago. There, archaeologists unearthed a small gourd fragment carved with the figure of a man standing tall, holding staffs in each hand. Radiocarbon dating placed the artifact at over 4,000 years old, centuries before the rise of the Inca. The resemblance to later depictions of Viracocha is striking. Already, in the dawn of Andean civilization, the god was present, carried in symbols that would outlast empires. As centuries passed, Viracocha's image spread. At Tiwanaku, near the shores of Lake Titicaca, he appears in monumental form on the Gateway of the Sun. Here he is rendered in intricate detail. A stern face, rays radiating like a halo, and 2 staffs clenched firmly in his hands. Around him cluster winged figures, some with human faces, others more animalistic. Scholars interpret these as celestial beings, messengers of the god. The iconography is unmistakable. Viracocha was not a local deity, not a minor spirit of rain or harvest. He was cosmic, a god of creation and order, master of both the heavens and the earth. When the Inca rose to power centuries later, they too embraced Viracocha. He became their high god, even more exalted than Inti, the sun. In their mythology, Viracocha emerged from the waters of Lake Titicaca, shaped humanity, and brought knowledge of agriculture and society. Dissatisfied with his first creations, he destroyed them in a flood, then remade the world anew. After teaching his children the ways of life, he walked across the Andes, disappearing over the Pacific horizon, promising one day to return. It is a story that resonates with patterns found elsewhere. A flood myth, a creator who molds humanity, a teacher who departs with the promise of return. These motifs echo in Mesopotamia, in the Bible, in countless cultures around the world. How is it that the same archetype emerges in such different places? Is it coincidence, or the echo of a deeper memory shared across civilizations? The staff-bearing figure of Viracocha deepens the riddle. Why staffs? In Andean culture, they symbolized authority and power, but they also appear in ancient Near Eastern iconography. The Lord of the Staffs motif is found in Sumerian art, in Egyptian depictions of pharaohs holding crooks and flails, in the rod of Moses in biblical stories. Across cultures, the staff marks the mediator between human and divine. Viracocha's image, holding twin staffs, aligns him with this archetype, as though the Andes were part of a global language of power and creation. Yet Viracocha is not only a god of myths and symbols. To the people of the Andes, he was real enough to shape their daily lives. In ceremonies, priests invoked his name, calling for rain, fertility, protection. Pilgrims traveled to his sacred sites, leaving offerings in stone shrines scattered across mountains and valleys. To the Inca, claiming descent from Viracocha's children gave legitimacy to their empire. He was not an abstract concept. He was the very root of their authority. But here is where the mystery intensifies. Descriptions of Viracocha portray him as tall, with a beard and pale skin, features unusual among the indigenous peoples of the Andes. Spanish chroniclers, hearing the stories, seized upon this, seeing in Viracocha a foreshadowing of their own arrival. They cast themselves as the returning gods, conquerors legitimized by prophecy. Yet the myth predates the conquest, recorded in oral traditions that cannot be dismissed. Why did the Andean people remember their creator with features that set him apart from themselves? Was it simple symbolism, otherness as a mark of divinity, or was it a memory of an actual encounter with someone, or something different? Legends speak of Viracocha walking among humans, teaching them how to build, how to farm, how to live in harmony. He was no distant sky god, but a traveler, a guide. And then he left, vanishing into the western sea. For some, this is nothing more than myth. For others, it is tantalizing evidence of contact, perhaps with advanced visitors, perhaps with beings we might call extraterrestrials. The story of the teacher who comes from afar transforms humanity and then departs is a recurring theme across world mythology. Prometheus, Quetzalcoatl, Oans, names that echo Viracocha's role. Is it coincidence or a hidden chapter of history? The Gateway of the Sun at Tiwanaku still stands, its carving of Viracocha staring out over the Altiplano. Archaeologists measure the precision of its astronomy, noting how the gateway aligns with solstices, how its symbols may encode a calendar. To them, it is evidence of advanced Andean science. But for others, it is more. A record left by a teacher who brought knowledge from elsewhere, knowledge preserved in stone so it would not be lost. The god with the staffs is both symbol and instruction, both myth and memory. Standing before such monuments, one feels the dual weight of history and mystery. On one hand, Viracocha is part of the natural evolution of culture, a god born of human imagination, shaped by ritual and need. On the other, his presence across millennia, his image repeated from Caral to Tiwanaku to Cusco, suggests something more enduring, something that transcended empires. He is not only a god of the Andes, he is a puzzle piece in the larger question of human origins. Perhaps Viracocha was simply the embodiment of wisdom, the archetype of the teacher. Perhaps he was nothing more than myth. Or perhaps, just perhaps, he was real, whether as a traveler from another land, a survivor of a forgotten civilization, or a visitor from the stars. The Andes hold their secrets tightly, and Viracocha's gaze from the gateway of the sun does not answer. It only asks. As the Andean wind sweeps across the plateau, carrying the cry of condors high above, one can almost imagine the god himself walking again, staff in hand, striding toward the horizon. He is gone, yet not gone. Absent, yet everywhere. And like the stones and skulls, his story endures, an open question carved into the bedrock of history. The story of Viracocha doesn't end at Lake Titicaca, nor at Tiwanaku's monumental gate. It travels across mountains and valleys, whispered in villages, carved into stones, remembered in rituals. Wherever he appears, the details vary, but the outline remains. A tall figure, clothed in a long robe, bearing staffs, walking among humanity to teach, then departing towards the horizon. It is the persistence of this image that unsettles, the way it reappears with such consistency that it begins to feel less like imagination and more like memory. Among the Inca, Viracocha was described as a wanderer. He was not a god enthroned in the sky, but a teacher who moved from place to place, shaping societies as he went. He gave laws, taught agriculture, introduced the arts of weaving and building. He carried not only divine authority but practical wisdom, as though the two were inseparable. And always, after fulfilling his role, he left, striding toward the sea, promising someday to return. This image of the departing god is haunting. It suggests unfinished business, a thread left deliberately open in the tapestry of history. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, some indigenous people believed them to be the returning Viracocha and his companions. Pale-skinned, bearded strangers emerging from the sea with powerful technology, it was an eerie echo of prophecy. The Spanish, seizing on this, encouraged the association, presenting themselves as fulfillment of the ancient myth. Yet the tragedy of conquest wasn't the return of gods, but the devastation of empire. The prophecy was twisted into justification, and Viracocha's name became entangled with betrayal. Still, beneath the colonial distortion lies the deeper question. Why did the Andean peoples expect such a return at all? Legends of wandering teachers are not confined to the Andes. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, was said to have come from across the sea, taught knowledge, then departed, promising to return. In Mesopotamia, the figure of Oannes, a being half man, half fish, emerged from the waters to instruct humanity in the arts of civilization. In Greece, Prometheus stole fire for mankind. Again and again, myths across the world tell of beings who appear suddenly, bearing knowledge, reshaping societies, and then vanishing. The resemblance to Viracocha is uncanny. Skeptics argue that such myths arise naturally. Every society seeks an origin story, and teachers embody the passage from chaos to order. A wandering sage provides a convenient narrative. Wisdom does not come from nowhere. It is gifted, taught. The mythic teacher explains why human beings know what they know. Yet the stubborn similarity of details, the staffs, the robes, the departure across the sea, suggests something more than convenience. Could these myths be distorted memories of actual encounters, preserved in the only language available? Legend? The Gateway of the Sun at Tiwanaku strengthens this suspicion. The staff-bearing figure carved there is not random artistry. It is precise, deliberate, framed with astronomical alignments. The god is positioned not just as myth, but as cosmic lawgiver, his image tied to the movements of the heavens. It is less a portrait than a formula, encoding knowledge in stone. If Viracocha was purely imagination, why the meticulous geometry? Why the alignment with solstices? Why the sense of instruction hidden within the iconography? It feels less like worship and more like memory, encoded for transmission. Those who lean toward the ancient astronaut hypothesis see in Viracocha the clearest case. A visitor from elsewhere, perhaps not divine but advanced, who came to the Andes, shared knowledge, then departed. To them, the staffs are not mere symbols, but instruments. The robe not simple clothing, but the memory of a different kind of being. The pale skin, the beard, the departure over the sea, these become evidence of origin not in myth, but in encounter. The idea is speculative, But the pattern is seductive, and once seen, it is difficult to dismiss entirely. Yet perhaps the truth is more human, though no less extraordinary. Perhaps Viracocha represents the survival of a far older civilization, one erased by time. Imagine survivors of a great catastrophe, carrying remnants of knowledge, wandering into the Andes, teaching what they remembered. To the people they met, they would have seemed divine, their wisdom incomprehensible, their appearance foreign. Over centuries, memory would have transformed them into gods. In this view, Viracocha is not a visitor from the stars, but the last echo of an earth-born people whose existence we have forgotten. Standing on the Altiplano, the wind whipping across Lake Titicaca, it is easy to imagine such figures walking here. The landscape itself encourages myth. The mountains loom like guardians, the lake stretches vast and silent, the air thins until every breath feels sacred. In such a setting, it is not hard to believe that gods once walked, staffs in hand, teaching humanity. The land demands such stories. But what lingers most is the consistency of Viracocha's image. From Caral's gourd fragment to Tiwanaku's gateway to Inca myth, the same figure persists. Across thousands of years, cultures changed, languages shifted, empires rose and fell, yet the staff-bearing god remained. He was not abandoned, not forgotten, but carried forward, reshaped yet recognizable. Such persistence is rare. Myths usually mutate wildly, adapting to new needs. Viracocha, however, remained remarkably intact. This continuity is either coincidence or evidence of something deeply rooted in the collective memory of the Andes. At night, when the stars blaze over the high plateau, the stories of Viracocha take on a new dimension. People say he walked among the constellations, that he was both man and sky. The staffs he carried were not only symbols of rule, but of balance, one representing the heavens, the other the earth. In this interpretation, Viracocha is the mediator, the bridge, the one who holds opposites together. Whether as myth, memory, or something in between, he embodies the human longing for guidance, for a teacher who explains not just how to survive, but why we exist at all. And so the god remains, carved in stone, carried in legend, remembered in the bones of empire. He is at once familiar and strange, near and distant, human and more than human. He asks us not to choose between history and myth, but to sit with the tension between them, to recognize that sometimes the past speaks in riddles. The staff-bearing god of the Andes is one such riddle. And like the walls of Ollantaytambo or the skulls of Nazca, he stands before us, silent yet insistent, demanding that we wonder. At nearly 13,000 feet above sea level, the city of Tiwanaku lies on the wind-swept Altiplano, near the southern shores of Lake Titicaca. To approach it is to enter a world where air is thin and the light is sharp, where every sound seems to carry across endless plains. Today, Tiwanaku is a ruin, scattered stones, half-buried foundations, fractured monoliths. But once, more than 1,000 years ago, it was the heart of an empire, a ceremonial center that drew pilgrims from across the Andes, and at its core stands one of the most mysterious monuments in all of South America, the Gateway of the Sun. The gateway is a single block of andesite, carved and raised into a freestanding portal. It weighs around 10 tons, yet its edges are clean, its angles precise, as though cut with tools we cannot identify. At the center of its lintel is the figure known as the staff god, or Viracocha, a stern face, rays radiating like a crown, tears streaming like rain, and in each hand a staff topped with intricate designs. Surrounding him are 48 winged figures, some human, some bird-like, arranged in patterns that have sparked centuries of speculation. To stand before the gateway is to confront more than a doorway. It feels like an entrance into another kind of knowledge, a threshold not of stone alone, but of meaning. The carvings are dense, deliberate, and symbolic. Archaeologists believe they may encode a calendar. The 48 figures representing days or weeks, the arrangement of symbols marking solstices and equinoxes. Some researchers argue the gateway was designed as a solar observatory, a way of tracking the heavens through light and shadow. If so, it was not merely a monument, but an instrument, a machine in stone, tuned to the rhythms of the cosmos. This interpretation is reinforced by the layout of Tiwanaku itself. The city's main structures align with celestial events. The Kalasasaya Temple, a massive rectangular enclosure, was built to track the solstices. On specific days, the sun rises or sets perfectly between its stone pillars, marking the passage of the year. The Akapana Pyramid, now eroded, once carried channels that guided water in symbolic patterns, perhaps representing the Milky Way or the flow of life between sky and earth. Everywhere at Tiwanaku, architecture and astronomy merge, stone and sky interwoven into a single design. What does this mean for the figure of Viracocha on the gateway of the sun? To some, it is simple. He is the god of creation, ruler of time and space, his image serving as a cosmic emblem. To others, it is more provocative. The carving is not only symbolic but technical, encoding knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and perhaps even more advanced concepts. Erich von Däniken, in his controversial works, suggested that the gateway preserves the memory of contact with beings who brought knowledge from the stars. While mainstream archaeology rejects such claims, the allure of the idea remains. For when you stand before the gateway, you feel less like you are looking at art and more like you are facing a message. The precision of Tiwanaku's stonework deepens the mystery. Blocks of andesite and sandstone, some weighing over 100 tons, were quarried miles away and transported across the Altiplano. They fit together with a tightness that recalls Ollantaytambo and Sacsayhuamán, interlocking with puzzle-like joints. Channels, grooves, and drill holes mark the stones, features that seem almost industrial in design. Archaeologists debate their purpose: water control, structural reinforcement, or symbolic function. But to many eyes, they suggest techniques beyond what is usually attributed to pre-Columbian societies. The so-called H-blocks of Puma Punku, a site adjacent to Tiwanaku, are perhaps the most striking example. These stones are carved into complex geometric forms, each with precise angles and recessed niches, as if prefabricated parts of a larger design. They are uniform, modular, as though produced by templates or advanced tools. To skeptics, they are simply evidence of skilled stonemasons with patience and ingenuity. To others, they are fragments of a technology we no longer recognize. Whatever the truth, they contribute to the aura of Tiwanaku as a place where something extraordinary once occurred. The myths of the region only deepen that aura. Local legends hold that Tiwanaku was built by giants in a single night, or by Viracocha himself, who summoned the stones into place. When the Inca encountered Tiwanaku centuries later, they believed it to be the birthplace of humanity, the place where the world was remade after a great flood. To them, the ruins were not abandoned architecture, but sacred memory, the bones of creation itself. When the Spanish chroniclers arrived, they too were struck by the scale and mystery of Tiwanaku. Some wrote that it could not have been built by ordinary humans, that it must have been the work of demons or gods. Even in the 16th century, when conquest was their primary focus, they paused in awe at the ruins, noting the precision of the stones and the strangeness of the carvings. Their writings remind us that Tiwanaku has always provoked wonder, always challenged explanation. At sunset, when the altiplano glows with gold and the cold air sharpens, the gateway of the sun casts long shadows across the plain. The carved face of Viracocha seems to watch the horizon, his tears glistening as though lit by fire. The staffs in his hands appear less like weapons and more like instruments, tools of balance and order. The winged figures around him seem to move in the fading light, as if the stone itself were alive with meaning. In such moments, the line between archaeology and myth dissolves, leaving only the sense of presence, a presence that lingers across centuries. Perhaps the gateway was simply a calendar, a marker of time for a people who revered the heavens. Perhaps it was a portal of ritual, a threshold into sacred space. Or perhaps it was something more, a message carved in stone, meant to endure until humanity was ready to read it. Whatever its purpose, it remains one of the most enigmatic monuments on Earth, a silent witness to a vision of the cosmos we only partly understand. As night falls and stars blaze across the high plateau, the gateway of the sun becomes part of the sky it mirrors. The constellations wheel overhead, the Milky Way arches across the heavens, and the stone god waits, staffs in hand, framed by eternity. Tiwanaku may be in ruins, but its message endures. It asks us to consider the possibility that ancient people were not only farmers and warriors, but astronomers, engineers, philosophers, and perhaps recipients of knowledge from beyond. If Tiwanaku is a puzzle written in stone, then Puma Punku is its most cryptic fragment. Just a short distance from the Gateway of the Sun, this site seems less like a ruin of temples and more like the scattered remains of something broken apart, an explosion of stone blocks toppled and tumbled across the plateau. Yet when you look closer, the fragments reveal an astonishing level of precision, as if they were not random debris, but the shattered parts of a machine. Puma Punku's most famous stones are the so-called H-blocks, massive andesite pieces shaped with geometric precision, each resembling the letter H. They are not uniform in size, but share a common design, with niches, recesses, and grooves that seem engineered to interlock. To walk among them is to feel as if you are standing in the ruins of a dismantled construction kit, as though the builders had created modular components to be assembled into a larger whole. Archaeologists debate whether these were meant to fit together as walls, platforms, or ceremonial structures. Whatever their function, their accuracy is undeniable. Some surfaces are polished smooth, reflecting light with an almost metallic sheen. Edges are sharp, corners exact, holes drilled with such consistency that they appear to have been made by rotary tools. In certain blocks, parallel grooves cut deep into the stone as though made with saws. To modern eyes, they look mechanical, manufactured, produced with techniques we associate with advanced industry rather than Stone Age societies. Mainstream archaeology explains this as the result of patience, skill, and ingenuity. The people of Tiwanaku, it is argued, used stone hammers, chisels, and sand abrasion to shape the blocks. Over years, perhaps decades, they achieved precision through persistence. Experimental archaeologists have demonstrated that such methods are possible, though time-consuming. Yet skeptics note that the sheer uniformity, the repetition of exact dimensions, suggests something more systematic, something beyond hand tools. The debate simmers, unresolved, between admiration for human craft and suspicion of lost knowledge. The question of transportation only adds to the enigma. Many of the andesite blocks weigh tens of tons and were quarried miles away across Lake Titicaca. Moving them across water and land, then lifting and fitting them into place, would have required extraordinary coordination. The Tiwanaku people had no wheels, no draft animals suited for such loads, no known pulleys or cranes. And yet, the stones stand, mute testimony that somehow it was done. How? That is the unanswered question. Some propose that Puma punku was never finished, that what we see are the abandoned pieces of a project interrupted by disaster. Earthquakes, floods, or political collapse could have halted construction, leaving the blocks scattered as they are today. Others suggest the site was deliberately dismantled, perhaps during conquest or ritual desecration, its pieces cast down as an act of defiance. But a more radical view sees Puma punku not as an unfinished temple, but as the remains of technology we no longer understand. To those who favor the ancient astronaut theory, the H-blocks are not ceremonial architecture at all, but remnants of a lost machine, their precision evidence of knowledge beyond the Andean world. Even without invoking extraterrestrials, the site provokes wonder. The geometry of Puma punku suggests planning, modularity, and design principles that feel modern. Why did the builders create stones that could interlock like prefabricated components? Why did they carve niches that serve no obvious purpose? Why drill holes with such accuracy? If the goal was simple religious architecture, why go to such extremes of precision? The more one looks, the more it seems that form mattered as much as function, that the builders were encoding something in the very shape of the stones. The legends of the region echo the mystery. Local myths speak of gods who descended from the sky and built Puma punku in a single night, summoning stones into place with sound or breath. The Inca, arriving centuries later, declared it the work of Viracocha himself. They could not replicate it, only revere it. To them, Puma punku was sacred ground, a place where the divine had touched earth. Standing among the toppled blocks today, you feel that reverence. The scale is overwhelming, the silence profound. Each stone seems to hum with questions. Some surfaces bear patterns like keys or circuits, as if designed to connect. Others lie half-buried, their purpose hidden. Archaeologists sift through them, measuring angles, cataloging carvings, searching for context. But context often fails. Puma punku is too anomalous, too strange, too advanced for easy explanation. Night transforms the site. As the stars blaze across the high plateau, the blocks cast long shadows, their sharp lines etched in moonlight. The air grows cold, and the silence deepens until it feels as though the stones themselves are alive, waiting. In that silence, it is easy to imagine the builders, not primitive laborers with hammers, but engineers of a forgotten order, working with knowledge we have lost. Whether that knowledge came from their own genius or from elsewhere is the lingering question. Perhaps Puma Punku was never meant to be understood in purely functional terms. Perhaps it was a temple not only to gods, but to geometry, a place where form itself was sacred. The repetition of patterns, the symmetry of blocks, the interplay of light and shadow, all suggest a philosophy that saw mathematics as divine language. To carve stone with such precision was not merely practical, it was ritual, a way of inscribing eternity into the earth. Or perhaps, more unsettlingly, Puma Punku is evidence of a chapter of history erased by time. A culture with techniques that vanished. A civilization older than we know, whose knowledge slipped through the cracks of catastrophe. What if Tiwanaku and Puma Punku were not beginnings but remnants, the afterglow of something much older? The scattered blocks would then be less a puzzle of construction and more a fossil of forgotten mastery. Whatever its origin, Puma Punku refuses to be silent. It draws pilgrims, tourists, researchers, and dreamers alike. Each comes away with a different impression. Some convinced of human ingenuity, others of alien intervention, all united in awe. The H-blocks remain, indifferent to theories, enduring through centuries of wind and weather. They are not merely ruins. They are riddles carved in stone, questions heavy as granite, waiting for answers we may never find. For all its grandeur, Tiwanaku did not last forever. Like every empire, it rose, flourished, and eventually fell. But the way it collapsed is wrapped in the same aura of mystery that surrounds its construction. Archaeologists debate the causes: climate change, drought, internal strife. But the myths of the Andes tell a different story, one of cataclysm, of a world remade by flood and fire. Between the facts of archaeology and the whispers of myth lies a space where imagination cannot help but wonder whether Tiwanaku's fall was less a natural decline than a chapter in the larger cycle of destruction that ancient people remembered all too well. By the 11th century, the Tiwanaku Empire had stretched far across the Altiplano, its influence reaching into valleys and mountains, its trade routes connecting coast, highlands, and jungle. But then, suddenly, it unraveled. The city that had once been the hub of ritual and power was abandoned. Its plazas fell silent, its stones scattered by wind and weather. Excavations suggest a prolonged drought struck the region, drying Lake Titicaca's shores, withering crops, and starving the people. Without food, the empire's structure collapsed, and Tiwanaku faded into ruin. On one level, this is a familiar story: nature humbling civilization. Yet the myths recorded by the Inca and their descendants frame the collapse in a cosmic register, tying it not only to drought, but to the wrath of gods and the cleansing of the world. The flood myth of the Andes is one of the most persistent in world mythology. It tells of a time when humanity angered Viracocha with arrogance and violence. In his fury, he unleashed a deluge that drowned the earth, sparing only a few survivors to repopulate the world. Afterward, he reshaped humanity from stone, teaching them anew before walking away into the sea. In this story, Tiwanaku itself becomes the place of rebirth, the site where the post-flood world was made. The ruins, then, are not the beginning of civilization, but its second chapter, the first having been swept away by waters we no longer remember. Across the globe, similar stories echo. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh describes a flood sent by the gods to cleanse the world. In the Bible, Noah builds an ark to preserve life through a divine deluge. In India, Manu is warned by a fish god of a coming flood. From Polynesia to North America, flood myths abound, their similarities uncanny. Skeptics argue that floods are common in river cultures, and such myths emerge naturally. Yet the universality of the themes suggests something more. Perhaps a cultural memory of real catastrophe, an event so profound it left its imprint on every people who lived through it. In the Andes, geological evidence hints at abrupt climate shifts, floods, and seismic upheavals. Lake Titicaca has risen and fallen dramatically over millennia, its shorelines marked by ancient harbors now stranded far inland or submerged deep underwater. Archaeologists have found stone structures beneath the lake, suggesting that entire settlements were drowned long ago. Could these be remnants of the very flood remembered in myth? If so, Tiwanaku's story is not simply one of decline by drought, but part of a longer cycle of destruction and renewal, catastrophe and rebirth. What makes the Tiwanaku myths even more haunting is their suggestion of prior civilizations. The Inca spoke of a people before them, destroyed in the deluge, their ruins scattered across the Andes. To them, Tiwanaku was not the beginning, but the remnant of an older age. The myths say Viracocha created humans twice, once before the flood, once after. The elongated skulls, the megaliths, the strange precision of puma punku, all could be interpreted as traces of that earlier humanity, erased by water, remembered in story. This idea resonates with Plato's tale of Atlantis, another civilization destroyed by flood. Plato claimed his story was inherited from Egyptian priests, who spoke of a world older than memory, swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. Whether Atlantis existed or not, its legend echoes the same cycle. Hubris, divine punishment, catastrophe, survival, renewal. Could it be that all these myths are fractured memories of a real global event, a flood or series of cataclysms that swept away early civilizations and left survivors to rebuild? At Tiwanaku, the stones themselves seem to carry the memory of upheaval. Many lie toppled, as if thrown down by a violent force. Others are half buried, tilted awkwardly, displaced from their original positions. Some researchers suggest earthquakes tore through the site, collapsing walls and scattering blocks. Combined with floods and drought, the destruction could have been overwhelming. For the people who lived through it, the collapse would have felt apocalyptic. A world-ending event explained only as divine wrath. Standing on the altiplano, with the vast lake shimmering in the distance, it is easy to imagine the terror of rising waters, of storms sweeping across the high plateau. The ruins around you are not only silent, they are broken, fractured, as if caught mid-sentence in a story cut short. In such silence, the myths feel less like imagination and more like testimony, accounts of survival written in metaphor, handed down in song and ritual until they became the very foundation of Andean identity. Modern science tends to dismiss myths as symbolic, but sometimes symbols preserve truths. The memory of a flood may be memory of glacial melts, tectonic upheavals, or tsunamis that reshaped landscapes and erased cities. For ancient people, such events were not natural, they were cosmic. Viracocha's flood was less a metaphor than an explanation, a way of naming the incomprehensible. The gods destroyed the world, then remade it. Humanity's task was to begin again. And so Tiwanaku, for all its mystery, may be less the birthplace of civilization than the graveyard of one. Its precise stones, its astronomical alignments, its strange carvings, these may be remnants of knowledge carried through catastrophe, fragments of a world older than we admit. Perhaps the people of Tiwanaku inherited more than they invented, building upon ruins left by those who came before, those erased by the flood. In this view, Tiwanaku is not only a ruin, but a palimpsest, the overwritten page of a much longer story. As twilight falls on the Altiplano, the lake reflects the fading light, turning gold, then silver, then black. The gateway of the sun stands silent, Viracocha's stern face watching, staffs in hand. The winds howl across the plain, carrying with them the memory of storms, of waters that once rose and receded. In that wind, one hears the echo of the flood myth, not as fiction, not as prophecy, but as warning. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall, and sometimes the earth itself decides the terms. Tiwanaku is both a monument to human ambition and a reminder of fragility, a city that once commanded the heavens, now lying broken beneath them. At the heart of the Altiplano, glittering under the high Andean sun, lies Lake Titicaca. It is the highest navigable lake in the world, vast and deep, straddling the border of modern Peru and Bolivia. To stand on its shores is to confront a horizon of water that seems like an inland sea stretching to the mountains beyond. For the Inca, and for civilizations before them, Titicaca was not just geography. It was sacred. Here, they said, the world was born. Here, Viracocha emerged from the waters to bring light after primordial darkness. Here, the first ancestors rose from islands, carrying the seed of humanity into the mountains. The myths converge on a single idea. Lake Titicaca is the womb of creation. The Inca told of Viracocha rising from its depths after a flood had destroyed the earlier world. He summoned the sun, moon, and stars into the sky, bringing order to chaos. He then fashioned stone figures that became the first humans, sending them out to populate the earth. Other tales speak of the children of the sun, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, emerging from the lake to found Cusco, the future capital of empire. Always the lake is the source, the threshold between water and world. For centuries, these were only stories, metaphors of beginnings. But in the year 2000, a team of archaeologists announced a discovery that seemed to blur the line between myth and fact. Diving into the depths of Lake Titicaca, they found the remains of what appeared to be a temple, stone walls, terraces, steps, and a carved road now lying beneath the water. The structure stretched for hundreds of meters, its stones precisely laid, its design unmistakably human. Suddenly, the myths of sunken origins had a new resonance. There really were ruins beneath the sacred lake. Carbon dating and analysis suggested the underwater structures were more than 1,000 years old, perhaps built by the Tiwanaku or even earlier cultures. They might have been drowned as the lake's water level rose, submerging settlements once on its shores. To archaeologists, this was fascinating but not unprecedented. Landscapes change, water encroaches, cities are lost. Yet for those attuned to legend, the discovery seemed like confirmation that Lake Titicaca was not only mythically the source of civilization, but historically home to a sunken one. The find sparked comparisons to Atlantis, to other tales of drowned worlds. Were these submerged structures the remnants of a forgotten chapter, an Andean Atlantis swallowed by rising waters? The idea is provocative, but even without grand speculation, the reality is compelling. Beneath the surface of Titicaca lies the memory of human settlement, preserved in silence, a reminder that landscapes shift and civilizations adapt or perish. What makes the underwater ruins even more evocative is their location in a place already revered as cosmic. The islands of Titicaca are filled with sacred sites. The island of the sun, where Inca priests conducted rituals to honor the solar deity. The island of the moon, where female priestesses worshipped lunar cycles, and countless smaller shrines where offerings were cast into the lake. Even today, divers find ceramics, gold objects, and carved stones deliberately placed in its depths, sacrifices to the gods who dwelled in the waters. The lake was never just water. It was a temple without walls, a liquid sanctuary. Imagine a ritual. Priests rowing out in reed boats, carrying offerings of gold and pottery. The waters reflect the blazing sun, dazzling and blinding. At the appointed place, they tip the offerings overboard, watching them sink into the dark. In their belief, the gods would receive them directly, hidden beneath the surface. To them, the lake was not an end, but a passage, a door to the realm of the divine. The discovery of underwater ruins only strengthens that vision. Perhaps the priests knew of cities already drowned, saw them as thresholds, and chose to continue the dialogue with the gods where land had been taken by water. The myths of Titicaca also speak of giants, beings who inhabited the world before humanity. Some versions say Viracocha created these giants, but when they disobeyed, he destroyed them in the flood, leaving only stones as their remains. Indeed, the Andes are filled with megaliths and statues that seem too large, too heavy, almost designed for hands bigger than ours. To the people of the highlands, these were not random carvings. They were the petrified bones of an earlier race. The lake, as the axis of creation, was also the graveyard of the old world, holding within its depths the memory of beings lost to catastrophe. Science offers more modest interpretations. The underwater temple was likely Tiwanaku in origin, built when the lake's level was lower. Climate shifts and tectonic changes raised the waters, drowning what once was shoreline. But even this explanation carries weight. It confirms that human settlements were indeed swallowed, that the landscape itself was unstable, reshaping history with every rise and fall. The myths of flood may not be metaphor at all, but memory, transmitted across generations, clothed in the language of gods and giants. Standing on the shore today, one can see fishermen in reed boats, their design unchanged for thousands of years, skimming the surface with quiet strokes. The water glimmers blue by day, silver by night, hiding its secrets beneath. To the modern mind, it is a beautiful lake with archaeological intrigue. To the ancient Andean, it was nothing less than the navel of the world, the place where the cosmos was born, and where humanity was twice remade. At dusk, when the mountains darken and the first stars appear, Lake Titicaca seems to breathe. The surface ripples like a living skin, reflecting both heaven and earth. The thought lingers. If myths are memory, then this water is more than sacred. It is an archive, storing not only offerings of gold, but the bones of cities, the echoes of floods, the presence of gods. Somewhere beneath the waves, Viracocha still walks, carrying his staffs, waiting for the moment to rise again. From the high waters of Lake Titicaca, the journey turns toward the desert once more. Here, on the coastal plains of southern Peru, the land is stark and bare, a canvas of sand and stone stretching for miles. There are no rivers carving valleys, no forests offering shade, only arid earth, wind, and silence. Yet it is in this desolate landscape that one of the most enduring mysteries of ancient civilization lies written: the Nazca Lines. Spread across an area of nearly 200 square miles, these geoglyphs, colossal drawings etched into the desert floor, depict animals, plants, geometric patterns, and straight lines that run for miles. The figures are enormous: a hummingbird with wings stretched over 300 feet, a monkey coiled in a spiral tail, a spider longer than a football field, and trapezoids so vast they can only be fully grasped from the air. From the ground, they are nearly invisible, simple shallow trenches a few inches deep. But from above, they reveal themselves as works of breathtaking scale, as if designed for eyes in the sky. The Nazca people, who flourished between 200 BCE and 600 CE, created these lines by scraping away the top layer of reddish-brown pebbles to reveal the lighter soil beneath. The hyper-arid climate preserved them for centuries, the desert acting as a natural museum. But why? Why would an ancient culture, without aircraft, create designs only visible from hundreds of feet above the ground? The question has lingered since the lines were rediscovered in the 20th century, inspiring theories that range from the sober to the fantastical. One explanation is ritual. Archaeologists argued that the lines may have been ceremonial walkways, paths traced during religious processions. The geometric shapes, trapezoids, spirals, and straight lines, could have guided movement, transforming the desert into a sacred stage. The animal figures may have represented totemic spirits, invoked for fertility, rain, or cosmic balance. In this reading, the Nazca lines were not meant to be seen from above at all. They were meant to be walked, to be experienced from the ground as participants moved along them in ritual. Others suggest the lines were astronomical. The straight lines, some stretching for miles, appear to align with solstices, equinoxes, and the rising and setting of stars. The spider, for instance, may symbolize the constellation Orion, the monkey, the Pleiades. If so, the desert was a giant observatory, the earth itself mapped to the heavens. The Nazca people, like many ancient cultures, may have sought to mirror the sky on the ground, embedding cosmic order into landscape. But the sheer visibility of the figures from above invites another interpretation. Could it be that the lines were meant as offerings, signals, or messages to beings in the sky? To this day, some researchers argue the Nazca lines cannot be fully explained without considering their aerial perspective. Maria Reiche, the German mathematician who devoted her life to studying them, argued they were a calendar, a vast system of astronomical alignments designed to track celestial cycles. Others, more speculative, suggest they were landing strips, navigational beacons, or symbols carved for gods or visitors who viewed the earth from above. The image is irresistible, a desert turned into a canvas for communication, humanity carving its devotion into the skin of the earth so it could be seen by those looking down. Whether gods, ancestors, or something else, the Nazca seemed determined to make their voices visible to the sky. To walk among the lines is disorienting. From the ground, you see only shallow grooves in the dust, stretching into nothing. The scale is incomprehensible until you ascend, today by plane, but once perhaps only in imagination. From above, the desert blossoms with form. Animals running, birds flying, geometries spreading like a coded language. The sensation is uncanny, as if you are witnessing a message not meant for human eyes at all. Legends in the Andes speak of sky beings, of gods who descended to teach and then returned to the heavens. Some suggest the lines were invitations, markers pointing the way, signs of devotion carved so the gods would not forget their people. Others imagine the Nazca priests lying in the desert, watching the stars trace their own invisible lines across the night, then mirroring those lines on the earth. In both interpretations, the lines are bridges between earth and sky, between mortal and divine. What unsettles is not only the scale, but the silence. There are no inscriptions explaining the purpose, no texts to decode the meaning, only lines, shapes, and the vast emptiness of desert. The absence of explanation becomes part of the mystery. The Nazca lines are less a statement than a question carved into the ground, a riddle left for us to puzzle over. Skeptics dismiss the extraterrestrial theories as fantasy, pointing out that the lines can be seen from surrounding hills, that ancient people had no need for aircraft to imagine scale. To them, the lines are ritual art, grand in vision but human in origin. Yet even within this explanation, the awe remains. To devote such effort, to carve hundreds of figures across miles of desert, to maintain them for centuries. This speaks of a worldview that treated landscape as sacred canvas. Whether for gods, stars, or ancestors, the Nazca transformed barren earth into living symbol. As the sun sets, the desert glows red and the lines fade into shadow. Yet from above, in the fading light, they still gleam faintly, as though etched in silver. The hummingbird seems to hover. The monkey coils in perpetual motion. The spider waits in its endless stillness. One cannot help but wonder who the intended audience was. Was it the people themselves, enacting rituals across the lines? Was it the gods, watching from the sky? Or was it something more enigmatic? Visitors who once descended and left humanity reaching upward, carving signs to call them back? Whatever the answer, the Nazca lines endure. They remind us that even in the most desolate of places, humanity has always sought to connect with the beyond, to inscribe meaning on the earth in hopes it would reach the heavens. The desert holds its silence, but in that silence, the lines speak. A language we may never fully understand, but one that still stirs the imagination across centuries. Beneath the burning sun of the Peruvian desert, not far from the great canvas of the Nazca lines, lies the ruin of a city unlike any other. It is not a city of commerce or empire, not a center of conquest or kingship, but a place built for something deeper, more elusive. Its name is Kahachi, and it was the ceremonial capital of the Nazca world. Here, the desert itself became temple. The community gathered not for daily life, but for ritual, sacrifice, and the strange dialogue between earth and sky. Kahachi was built of adobe, its walls molded from sun-baked clay, fragile against the centuries, but still standing in fragments. Spread across the desert, the site contains pyramids, plazas, and platforms, arranged with deliberate care. Unlike Tiwanaku or caral, it lacks the permanence of stone, as if it was never meant to last in the same way. Instead, its power lay in the gatherings it hosted, the rituals enacted within its walls, and the meanings woven into its soil. Archaeologists believe Kahachi was active between 100 BCE and 400 CE, drawing pilgrims from across the Nazca valleys. It was a place of festivals, of offerings, of communion with the unseen. Excavations have uncovered startling finds. In the sands of Kahachi lie not only ceramics and textiles, but human remains, skulls severed from bodies, some intentionally modified, others decorated with cords and paint. These are the infamous trophy heads, skulls believed to have been taken in ritual war or sacrifice. Holes drilled in their foreheads suggest they were strung together, displayed, or worn. To the Nazca, these heads were not mere trophies of conquest, but vessels of spiritual power. The human skull was thought to contain life force, a conduit between the living and the divine. By offering heads, the people gave the gods vitality itself. The practice of skull modification was not limited to trophies. Many of the remains at Kahachi show evidence of cranial deformation, the same elongation seen across cultures of the Andes and beyond. Here, elongated skulls appear in burials and offerings, suggesting they carried sacred meaning, perhaps marking priests or elites as chosen. The connection between altered bodies, trophy heads, and the vast desert lines points toward a worldview in which identity and cosmos were inseparable, where even the shape of a skull was part of humanity's communication with the divine. Imagine the ceremonies. Pilgrims arrive from scattered valleys, carrying offerings of food, pottery, and woven cloth. Priests, their heads elongated into conical forms, lead processions across the plazas. Fires burn in altars, smoke rising into the desert sky. Trophy heads hang on cords, swaying in the hot wind, their presence both eerie and revered. Chants echo across adobe walls, drums pound, flutes wail, and the community enters a collective trance. Beyond the city, the Nazca lines stretch into the distance, invisible from the ground, yet symbolically present. Together, Kahachi and the lines form a single sacred landscape, the city of ritual and the canvas of sky-bound symbols working in harmony. The question remains, what were the Nazca seeking in these rituals? Some scholars argue they were appeals for fertility, rain, and agricultural prosperity. The desert is unforgiving, its survival precarious. To carve lines into the ground, to offer skulls and sacrifice, to build ceremonial centers like Kahachi was to negotiate with forces larger than humanity. The gods of sky and earth had to be honored, placated, persuaded. The lines were prayers written on sand, the rituals at Kahachi their enactment. But others sensed something more. The sheer scale of the lines, the emphasis on altered skulls, the obsession with cosmic imagery, these suggest a worldview oriented not only toward survival, but toward transcendence. Perhaps the Nazca sought not just rain, but contact, not just fertility, but communication with beings beyond. The trophy heads, the processions, the desert geoglyphs could all be seen as attempts to reach upward, to bridge the human and the divine. What makes Kahachi especially enigmatic is its sudden abandonment. By the 5th century CE, the site fell silent. The Nazca did not simply fade. They deliberately buried parts of the city, covering pyramids with sand, dismantling structures, sealing away the sacred. It was as if they chose to erase their own temple, to hide it from the world. Why? Archaeologists suggest drought or social collapse drove the decision, Yet the deliberate burial hints at something more, a ritual closure, an ending written in the language of concealment. Perhaps the gods had turned away. Perhaps the rituals had failed. Perhaps the city's purpose was complete. Standing among the low mounds today, the desert wind whistling through broken adobe, one feels the ghost of those ceremonies. The silence is heavy, but beneath it lies memory. The skulls, the offerings, the lines stretching beyond the horizon all speak of a people who gave themselves fully to the sacred, who reshaped their bodies, their land, their lives in pursuit of contact with the unseen. Kahachi is not just ruins, it is the shadow of a conversation that never truly ended, a dialogue between humanity and the heavens written in ritual, symbol, and sacrifice. The Nazca themselves disappeared, their culture replaced by later civilizations. But the desert preserved their legacy. The lines remain, etched across miles of sand. The skulls endure, their strange forms unsettling and awe-inspiring. And Kahachi's buried pyramids still rise gently from the earth, whispers of a time when entire communities lived not for empire or conquest, but for communion with something greater. As dusk falls over the desert, the outlines of Kahachi blur into shadow, merging with the landscape. The silence grows, the stars appear overhead, and suddenly the geoglyphs come alive again, not visible to human eyes from the ground, but present in the imagination, drawn in starlight across the sky. The city and the lines, the skulls and the rituals, all weave together into a single truth. The Nazca lived in a world where the boundary between Earth and cosmos was porous, where human life was part of a larger design etched into both ground and sky. Before the Nazca etched their vast lines into the desert, another culture flourished along Peru's southern coast. The Paracas, who lived from around 800 BCE to 200 CE, were not builders of giant geoglyphs, but masters of textiles, medicine, and funerary ritual. They left no stone cities, but in their burials they preserved a world of extraordinary artistry and strange practices. It is within Paracas' tombs that some of the most dramatic elongated skulls in the world have been found. Skulls stretched so severely they seem almost inhuman, provoking wonder, unease, and endless speculation. The Paracas lived in the harsh environment of the coastal desert, sustained by irrigation and proximity to the Pacific. Their settlements were modest, clusters of dwellings near fertile valleys, but their cultural expression found its height in two forms: textiles of unmatched complexity and funerary bundles that preserved their dead in astonishing condition. Wrapped in layers of cloth, seated upright, and buried in deep pits, the Paracas dead became time capsules, their bodies mummified naturally by the dry climate, their belongings preserved for centuries. It was in these necropolises that archaeologists uncovered the elongated skulls, hundreds of them, often wrapped in colorful textiles, placed in seated positions, surrounded by offerings. Unlike the Nazca, whose skull modifications were pronounced but moderate, the Paracas' skulls were extreme. Some stretched backward into elongated domes, their cranial vaults expanded by up to 25%. The sheer volume and shape made them appear less human, more otherworldly. Even more striking, some skulls show differences in cranial structure that have fueled controversy. Larger parietal plates, fewer suture lines, as if they were not simply deformed humans, but something else entirely. Most scholars attribute the elongation to intentional cranial binding, practiced from infancy with boards or tight wrappings. The Paracas, like many cultures, may have associated elongated skulls with status, divinity, or identity. But alternative theorists argue some skulls exhibit features not explainable by deformation alone: different bone thickness, larger cranial capacity, unusual sutures. To them, the Paracas skulls hint at an unknown population, perhaps even a hybrid species. DNA studies conducted in recent years have only deepened the intrigue, with preliminary reports suggesting non-local lineages, though the results remain debated and far from conclusive. Whatever their origin, the Paracas skulls point to a society that placed immense importance on the shape of the head. This was not casual. It was deliberate, widespread, and sacred. To carry such a skull was to carry identity itself, to mark oneself as part of a chosen class. And when these individuals died, they were not simply buried, they were enshrined. Paracas mummies were wrapped in layers upon layers of textiles, some so intricate they are considered among the greatest works of pre-Columbian art. The Paracas textiles are dazzling. Woven with fine cotton and dyed in brilliant colors, they depict complex patterns of animals, shamans, and supernatural beings. Figures with wings, serpents, and elongated heads appear in repeating motifs, suggesting a cosmology in which the human and the divine intermingled. Some textiles show beings in flight, carrying staffs or spreading wings, their faces stretched in ways that echo the elongated skulls found in the tombs. Were these representations of deities, or were they portraits of the very people wrapped within the cloth? One textile fragment shows a figure with large almond-shaped eyes, a long head, and rays or feathers radiating outward. To modern eyes, it looks eerily like depictions of beings not of this earth. To the Paracas, it may have been a god, a shaman in transformation, or a memory of ancestral visitors. The textiles, like the skulls, blur the line between human and other, between history and myth. Medicine was another Paracas achievement. Archaeological evidence shows they practiced trepanation, the surgical drilling of holes in the skull, at a level of sophistication surprising for their era. Some skulls bear multiple healed trepanations, indicating patients survived the procedures. To cut into the head and allow someone to live is no small feat. It suggests not only advanced knowledge of anatomy, but also a world view in which the head was the seat of both illness and healing. Combined with their obsession with skull shape, this indicates the Paracas saw the cranium as central to identity, health, and spirituality. Why such focus on the head? Perhaps the answer lies in the Andean cosmology that linked humans to gods through transformation. By reshaping the head, by wrapping it in sacred textiles, by cutting into it to heal or to release spirits, the Paracas enacted a ritual dialogue with the cosmos. The skull was not just bone. It was a gateway, a vessel of divine connection. The desert preserved these practices in silence. When modern excavators opened the necropolises, they found tombs stacked with seated mummies, their skulls elongated, their bodies wrapped in vivid cloth. To gaze upon them today is unsettling. The colors are still bright, the forms still vivid, as though the dead are waiting, watching. Their elongated heads tilt forward, their empty sockets hidden beneath layers of fabric, their presence both fragile and immense. Some imagine these mummies as guardians of forgotten knowledge, keepers of a story too vast to fit in our timelines. Were they the ancestors of the Nazca, the precursors who taught the rituals later carved into desert lines? Were they inheritors of something even older, carrying in their skulls the memory of beings who once walked among humanity? Or were they simply human, extraordinary in their devotion, crafting identity from bone and thread? The Paracas culture eventually gave way to the Nazca, its practices absorbed and transformed. The mummies ceased, the textiles evolved, the skull elongation continued but less extreme. Yet the legacy of Paracas lingers in every mystery of the Andes. Their skulls remain among the strangest ever found. Their textiles remain among the most beautiful ever woven. And their world view, though silent, still speaks in symbols too powerful to ignore. At night, when the desert cools and the stars blaze overhead, one can imagine the Paracas priests wrapping their dead in shimmering cloth, burying them in pits deep in the earth, whispering prayers to the sky. Above them, constellations stretched across the heavens. Around them, the desert stretched into silence. In that silence, the dead were not gone. They were transformed, seated in eternity, their elongated skulls pointed toward the stars as though reaching still for the gods. If the Paracas and Nazca revealed their worldview through skulls and lines, the moche and the Chavin chose a different canvas: ritual, sacrifice, and art that blurred the line between human and divine. These cultures, spread across coastal valleys and highland temples, built no empires to rival the Inca, but they left behind images and monuments that disturb and fascinate even now. Their legacy is not of desert lines or elongated skulls, but of fanged gods, rivers of blood, and art that seems to whisper of transformation, both sacred and terrifying. The Chavin came first, flourishing between 900 and 200 BCE in the northern highlands of Peru. Their ceremonial center at Chavin de Huantar became a hub of pilgrimage, its temples filled with labyrinthine passages, echoing stairways, and carved stone stelae depicting beings both human and animal. At the heart of the complex stood the lanzon, a stone monolith rising like a fang from the earth, carved with the image of a deity with snarling mouth, feline fangs, and serpents for hair. This god, often called the staff god, was a composite merging jaguar, caiman, eagle, and human into a single being. To the Chavin, divinity was not separate from the natural world, but a fusion of its most powerful forces. Visitors to Chavin de Huantar likely experienced more than architecture. Archaeologists have found evidence of hallucinogenic cactus use, suggesting rituals of altered consciousness. Imagine pilgrims descending into dark tunnels, the sound of water rushing through underground canals, the flicker of torchlight revealing carvings of fanged beings. Under the influence of San Pedro cactus, visions would merge with the temple's imagery, creating an overwhelming sense of encountering the divine. The lanzon, with its towering, snarling presence, would not simply be a stone, it would be alive, the god itself staring down at trembling initiates. This blending of architecture, ritual, and altered states left a legacy that would ripple through later Andean cultures. The staff god of Chavin, with its fangs and staffs, reappears in Tiwanaku and Viracocha, suggesting a continuity of imagery across centuries. The jaguar, serpent, and condor motifs persisted, embodying transformation, power, and transcendence. The Chavin may have been the first to shape a uniquely Andean iconography of divine fusion, one that linked humans with the cosmos through visions, ritual, and symbol. Centuries later, along the northern coast of Peru, the moche carried that fusion into realms even more visceral. Flourishing between 100 and 800 CE, the moche built adobe pyramids, painted murals, and crafted ceramics of startling realism. Their art does not idealize. It depicts life and death with unflinching detail. Warriors in battle, priests conducting sacrifice, prisoners bound and bled. These images adorn temple walls and pottery alike. The moche did not hide their rituals. They celebrated them. The most infamous of these is the sacrifice ceremony, depicted repeatedly in murals and artifacts. Priests, richly adorned, cut the throats of bound captives, collecting their blood in golden goblets. This blood was then consumed, offered to the gods, or poured onto the earth to ensure fertility. To the moche, sacrifice was not cruelty, but cosmic necessity. Blood was life, and life had to be given back to sustain balance. Excavations at Huaca de la Luna, one of the great moche pyramids, confirmed the reality behind the art. There, archaeologists uncovered mass graves of sacrificed warriors, their throats cut, their bodies left as offerings. The murals on the walls above depict the same scenes, almost as if the pyramid was a theater of ritual, its art both record and instruction. The priests who performed these ceremonies were not merely leaders, they were intermediaries, ensuring the gods received their due. But the moche also left art that defies simple interpretation. Their ceramics depict beings with fanged mouths, hybrid creatures, and humans transforming into animals. Shamans appear in mid-transformation, their features merging with jaguar or serpent. Sexual imagery abounds as well, suggesting fertility rituals tied to cosmic cycles. Some vessels even show figures with elongated heads, echoing Paracas practices, as though the moche inherited fragments of older traditions and reinterpreted them in their own blood-soaked cosmology. What strikes the modern observer is the rawness of moche imagery. Unlike the abstract symbols of the Nazca or the monumental stones of Tiwanaku, the moche showed life in its most direct forms. Their gods demanded blood, and their art showed blood flowing. Their shamans sought transformation, and their vessels depicted the very moment when human and animal fused. It is a worldview unafraid of death, one that embraces it as part of the sacred cycle. Some scholars see continuity between Chavin and moche in the emphasis on transformation. The Chavin sought it through visions, hallucinogens, and labyrinthine temples. The moche sought it through blood, sacrifice, and ritual theater. Both believed humans could cross boundaries between life and death, human and animal, earth and sky. Both carved that belief into their art, creating a visual language that still unsettles. Yet here, too, we find echoes of something older. The staff god of Chavin resembles Viracocha at Tiwanaku. The fanged beings recall Olmec jaguar hybrids in Mesoamerica. The ritual bloodletting resonates with Maya sacrifice, where kings pierced their flesh to offer blood to the gods. Are these parallels the result of independent invention, or do they suggest a shared inheritance, fragments of a worldview older than the civilizations themselves? The moche eventually declined, their valleys struck by floods, droughts, and earthquakes. Their pyramids eroded, their rituals ended, but their art remained. Today, in museums, moche ceramics stare back with unsettling realism, wide eyes, fanged mouths, scenes of blood. They are not mythic abstractions, but stark reminders that for the moche, the sacred was not distant. It was immediate, bloody, and embodied. At dusk, standing before the ruins of Huaca del Sol, the largest moche pyramid, one feels the weight of that immediacy. The adobe bricks, millions of them, still rise from the desert, their eroded faces marked with the fingerprints of those who made them. Above, the sky darkens, and one imagines the ceremonies once held here, torches flaring, drums pounding, captives trembling, priests raising knives under the gaze of fanged gods. It is a scene both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a reminder that the sacred has many forms, not all comforting. The Chavin and moche remind us that the ancient Andes were not uniform. Each culture crafted its own dialogue with the divine, some through lines in desert, some through skulls, some through sacrifice. Yet threads connect them: the staff god, the obsession with transformation, the belief that humanity must give back to the cosmos. Whether through visions, blood, or bone, they sought the same thing: balance between earth and sky, mortal and divine. Across deserts and mountains, through temples and tombs, we have followed the echoes of civilizations that rose and fell long before the Inca, leaving behind fragments that refuse to settle neatly into history's categories. Elongated skulls from Paracas, geoglyphs stretching across the Nazca desert, fanged gods carved at Chavin, staff-bearing deities at Tiwanaku, and sunken temples beneath Lake Titicaca. Each one is a piece of a puzzle that, when placed together, forms a picture at once breathtaking and bewildering. Were these simply the cultural expressions of ancient peoples, or are they fragments of something greater? The echoes of a forgotten chapter of humanity's story. What unites them is not a single style or empire, but a pattern of obsession. Obsession with the head as vessel of power, with the sky as mirror of meaning, with the earth as canvas of devotion, with transformation as the path to the divine. Whether by reshaping skulls, carving mountains, drawing deserts, or sacrificing blood, the ancient Andes sought to bridge the human and the cosmic. Their monuments were not passive. They were instruments, machines of meaning, designed to open doors between worlds. The myths only deepen the sense of continuity. Viracocha rising from the waters, teaching humanity, then vanishing into the sea. The flood that destroyed an earlier race, leaving only survivors to repopulate the earth. The staff god appearing again and again, from Chavin to Tiwanaku, like a memory carried across centuries. These stories are not isolated. They resonate with myths from every corner of the globe. Creation, destruction, wandering teachers, floods, gods who walk among humans and then depart. Again and again, the same motifs return. Skeptics insist these are archetypes, natural products of the human mind. Every society explains the world with gods. Every people remembers disaster. Every culture imagines teachers. That is true. And yet the persistence of detail, elongated heads, staff-bearing gods, catastrophic floods, raises the question: are myths only imagination, or are they also memory? Could they be the distorted recollection of real events, real encounters, passed through the filter of generations until they became legend? The ruins themselves seem to whisper of something lost. Puma punku's H-blocks, with their machine-like precision, suggest techniques we do not yet understand. The Nazca lines, visible only from above, provoke questions about perspective and purpose. The Paracas skulls, stretched to inhuman proportions, raise doubts about who these people were or wished to become. The submerged temples of Titicaca speak of floods that reshaped landscapes, swallowing cities. Each site challenges us to reconsider what we think we know of the past. One possibility is that these civilizations were inheritors, not inventors. Survivors of some earlier catastrophe may have carried fragments of knowledge, astronomy, engineering, cosmology, into new societies, who enshrined it in stone and ritual. In this view, the staff god and Viracocha are not only myths, but memories of those survivors, teachers from a vanished age. Another possibility, more provocative, is that these teachers were not of this earth at all, that what the ancients remembered as gods were visitors from beyond, beings who came, instructed, and departed, leaving only monuments and myths in their wake. We cannot prove either vision. Archaeology is careful, bound by evidence, wary of speculation. It explains in terms of climate, economy, social need. And yet, standing before the gateway of the sun, or flying above the Nazca lines, or gazing into the hollow eyes of a Paracas skull, one feels that caution fall away. The sense of mystery overwhelms the data. There is something here that resists reduction, something that calls us to wonder. Perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the true gift of these civilizations is not hidden technology or proof of visitors, but the reminder that the world is larger than our explanations, that humanity, in every age, has sought connection with the beyond, has carved its questions into earth and bone. That we, too, are part of a story whose edges blur into myth. At sunset on the Altiplano, the sky burns gold, the mountains turn black, and Lake Titicaca glimmers like a mirror of the heavens. At Nazca, the desert cools, and the geoglyphs fade into shadow, still waiting to be seen. At Chavin, the lanzon stands in darkness, its fangs gleaming in flickering torchlight. At Paracas, mummies with elongated skulls sit in eternal silence, wrapped in cloth that still shines with color. Across the Andes, the stones, the skulls, the lines remain, silent but not mute, enduring but not explained. The ancients left us riddles, not answers. They ask us to listen, to imagine, to question the boundaries of history. Were they only human, striving for meaning? Were they inheritors of a forgotten world destroyed by flood? Were they witnesses to visitors we cannot name? The ruins will not say. They wait, patient as stone, for us to decide what story we will tell. And perhaps that is their final lesson, that mystery itself is sacred, that not knowing is part of the human condition, that to wonder is to be alive. So as the night falls over the Andes, as the stars emerge one by one, stretching across the sky like lines of light, the questions remain open, and it is in those questions that the past still breathes, the gods still walk, and the earth itself still speaks.